Welcome back to Forks After Dark. Tonight's story takes us far from Forks, back to a quiet Vermont summer in the late 90s, long before the Cullens became the talk of a rainy little town, and deep into the inner world of Alice Cullen. It is tender at first, and then it isn't. If you're new here, please subscribe and leave a comment telling us what corner of the Twilight universe you'd like to visit next. Now settle in. The story is already beginning. The Borrowed Hour by Forks After Dark. Chapter 1. The Off-Season. The dock had a particular sound at 7 in the morning, which was the kind of detail a person would only notice if they had nowhere to be and nothing to do and all the time in the world. Which I did, and always had. And sometimes I couldn't decide if that was the most beautiful fact about my existence or the most suffocating one. It was the creak of old wood against older wood, the rub of weathered planks against the pilings, a slow back and forth groan that the lake made the dock perform every time a ripple moved through it. I had been sitting at the end of the dock for 4 hours, which was nothing really, a blink and a half in the span of what I was, and I had listened to that particular sound so many times that I could count the variations. 6 distinct pitches, I had counted. That was the summer in Marrow Lake. The town sat in a fold of the Green Mountains, like something a past century had set down and forgotten to retrieve. It had been a resort community once, the kind of place where wealthy families from Boston and New York came to escape the heat of August, and the evidence of that better era was everywhere if you knew how to read decay. The boathouses with their paint curled back in long strips, the 2-story inn on the main road with its gingerbread trim going soft at the corners. The beach that was really only a narrow band of grayish sand, populated most mornings by a single patient heron. The summer people had mostly stopped coming. What remained were the year-rounders, several hundred of them, living quietly among their lovely ruins. We had arrived in late June, which Carlisle chose with care. Not so early that our pale faces and layered clothing drew comment in the heat. Not so late that the academic year would ask questions about Edward and Rosalie and Emmett, appearing nowhere near a school. The overcast that settled over Vermont's lake country most mornings was, as Jasper put it in his dry and economical way, practically designed for us. Esme had fallen in love with the house within 30 seconds of stepping through the door, which was the fastest I had ever seen her form an attachment, and also the most unsurprising thing in the world, because the house deserved it. It was a wide, low-slung structure of dark-stained timber right at the edge of the water, with a covered porch that ran its whole length and big windows that framed the lake like paintings. Half the roof had been leaking into buckets when we arrived. Esme had the buckets gone and the roof sealed within a week. And then she had moved on to the floors, the window casings, the sagging front steps, and the kitchen, which she rebuilt from the studs out, even though none of us would ever use it for its intended purpose. She sang while she worked, old songs in French and Italian that floated out through the open windows and mixed with the smell of sawdust and lake water. And even Emmett, who had been loudly bored since approximately the 3rd day of our residence, would slow his restless circling of the property whenever her voice reached him, and look, briefly, like a person at rest. We were a family who built homes we had to leave. This was not the first and would not be the last, and every one of Esme's repairs and improvements was a small, deliberate argument against the truth of that. I loved her for it, completely. Rosalie's argument was the opposite kind. She made it without shouting. She never needed to shout. But it was constant and precise, delivered in beautifully modulated tones of grievance, and it centered on the fact that there was nothing in Marrow Lake worth tolerating. No city within reasonable distance, no culture, No one who would appreciate the effort of being magnificent, which Rosalie was, always, even when she was scraping mildew off the porch rails in her oldest clothes. Even when she was staring down the long, empty main road of a faded resort town with an expression of such pure, concentrated disdain that the heron across the lake seemed to feel it. "There is literally one restaurant," she announced one evening, standing in the porch doorway, the screen door propped open with her shoulder. "One. And it closes at 8. There is technically a pizza counter at the gas station," Emmett offered from the porch swing, which was too small for him and emitted a sound of structural protest every time he shifted. "That's probably food." "That is absolutely not what I meant." "There's a diner," I said. I had mapped the town in the first 2 days, which was the sort of thing I did. Compulsive accounting of what was there and what was missing, and where everything sat in relation to everything else. "It opens at 6. They have pie." Rosalie looked at me with the tolerant patience of a woman explaining something to a small, hopeful child. "We don't eat pie, Alice." "I know," I said. "But it's nice that someone makes it." She held my gaze for a moment, long enough to make her point, and then went inside. I could hear her moving through the house, adjusting things, creating order in the rooms she and Emmett had claimed. And underneath the faint resentment in her movements was something I knew better than to name aloud. The same hunger I felt, for a life that looked like a life. For a town that would know her name and not be afraid when it looked too long at her face and found it too still. We were not afraid, the two of us. We were something quieter than that. Grief adjacent, maybe. I had never found the right word. Emmett swung his legs off the porch rail and went to take a walk for the 4th time that day. He had covered every road within 5 miles in every direction, cataloging what was there. A covered bridge, a cemetery, a gas station, a diner, a post office, a small county hospital where Carlisle had taken a position as a consulting physician, a hardware store, 2 churches, and a shuttered apothecary storefront on Lake Street, whose sign had gone so faded that the original text was purely speculative. He kept returning to the covered bridge because there was a stream under it with good current, and he liked to drop sticks in from one side and watch them come out the other. He had told me this with zero embarrassment, which was one of the things I loved most about Emmett. I went back to the dock. It became my place, the way places become yours when you are bored and melancholy and too much of the same thing. By accident, by repetition, by a series of mornings in which you went there without deciding to, and then stayed longer than you meant to, because something about the particular combination of water and creaking wood and cold fog was easier than the alternative, which was being inside your own head. The alternative was looking ahead. My gift worked like this. When I reached for the future, I saw decisions crystallizing into paths, and from those paths I could trace the most likely shape of what was coming. It was not prophecy in the absolute sense. It was probability made briefly visible. Choices unmade were blank space. Choices made were lit. I had learned over decades not to reach for everything at once, because everything at once was disorienting in the way of too many voices in a crowded room, and because some futures were better not known until they had to be. The art was in directing the gift selectively, letting it rest on the people and situations that mattered most. In Marrow Lake, the future of anyone I reached for was terribly short and terribly ordinary, and there was nothing in that to fault. It was simply the nature of human time, its brevity, its specificity, its tendency to curve toward the mundane rather than the dramatic. I had watched hundreds of human futures unspool, and they were mostly quiet, mostly small. I had never decided whether I found that comforting or desolating. And in Marrow Lake, with nothing else to do, and no particular threat to track. The question got louder. I was sitting on the dock on the 7th morning of our residence, watching the fog lift off the water in slow, rolling layers, when I heard footsteps on the boards behind me. They were careful, deliberate footsteps. Not a runner's. Not the careless thump of someone who hadn't thought to look and see if the dock was occupied. These were footsteps that knew perfectly well the dock was occupied, and were making a decision about it anyway. I turned around. The girl who had stopped at the halfway point was around 16, slender in the way that suggested her body had other concerns than building mass. She had dark hair cut bluntly at the jaw and a canvas jacket over a striped shirt, and she was carrying a paperback with its cover bent all the way back in a way that made me feel a remote sympathy for the book. She looked at me with the flat assessment of someone who had learned to establish very quickly whether a stranger was worth the energy. "You're in my spot," she said. There was no heat in it. It was simply information. "Your dock?" I asked. "Nobody's dock. The boathouse has been empty for 4 years." She tilted her head slightly. "But I've had the end of it every morning since April. So, by the logic of squatters' rights." I thought about this. "That seems fair," I said. "There's room for 2, if you don't mind cold company." She gave a short, considering pause, and then walked to the end of the dock and sat down a few feet to my left, folding her legs under her with the slightly careful quality I was already learning to attribute to her heart rather than her mood. She opened the book and read for 3 minutes in complete silence, and I looked back at the water. "You're staying at the Lindqvist house," she said without looking up. "The one on the water. My mother pointed you out." "Alice Cullen," I said. "Wren Kowalczyk," she said. "Don't try to spell it." She turned a page. "Your family is very good-looking." "Thank you. I don't mean it as a compliment necessarily. It's just something I noticed. Like a fact. You're all very symmetrical." She looked sideways at me briefly. "Is that a Vermont thing? Being symmetrical?" "We're from the Pacific Northwest originally." She looked back at the book. "That explains the pallor." I laughed, and she glanced at me again with the very faint, arrested expression of someone recalculating. I had a laugh that sometimes startled people. Too quick, too bright, a little out of register with the context. Jasper told me once it was the laugh of someone who genuinely found the world surprising, and he had said it like he thought that was a good thing. "What are you reading?" I asked. She tilted the cover toward me without lifting her eyes. It was a thick paperback with a science fiction cover, a spacecraft cutting through an illustrated nebula. "It's the 3rd one in a series. I've been trying to get through it since February, but I keep having to go into the city for appointments, and I lose the thread." She paused. "Hospital appointments. I have a heart thing." She said it the way you say something you have said so many times that the words have lost their particular weight and become neutral, descriptive, like naming the color of a room. "I am in this room. The room is gray. I have a heart thing." I knew this already in the peripheral, inevitable way of my gift. Her path was visible from the moment I turned around and registered her as a person in my vicinity. A thread of future that moved for a specific, limited distance and then ended, as cleanly and finely as a road running off the edge of a map. Several months, less than half a year most probably, though the exact shape of it shifted the way futures did when no decision had yet been made. But the end point was there, fixed, regardless of how the days between here and there arranged themselves. I had looked at it only once, and briefly, and then I had looked away and made myself look at the lake. "Does it bother you?" she asked. "People saying that. Stating it flat out like that right at the start." "No," I said honestly. I think I prefer it. Good, Wren said. Me too. It saves time. She turned another page. Also, I literally cannot be bothered to do the whole thing where you pretend not to notice when I have to sit down suddenly, and then I pretend you're not pretending not to notice. It's exhausting. We sat in companionable quiet for another hour. The fog burned off, and the lake went from pewter to a flat, metallic blue-green, and 2 ducks passed at the end of the dock on their morning business without acknowledging us, which Wren watched with the close attention of someone who finds ducks genuinely interesting. I found that I had stopped counting the variations in the dock's creak. I was just listening to them. The afternoons that followed fell into a pattern without either of us designing one, the way patterns form between compatible people, through repetition of small choices that individually mean nothing and collectively mean quite a lot. She came to the dock most mornings. We talked, or we didn't, depending on the day. She was reading her way through the science fiction series and would sometimes read passages aloud without preamble, as though we were in the middle of a conversation we hadn't actually been having. And I learned to listen for the passages she chose because they were always the ones that were about time, or distance, or the loneliness of being made for something particular and finding the universe inconveniently large. She had a sense of humor that functioned as a kind of scaffolding, structural, load-bearing, there so that other things could exist around it without collapsing. She made jokes about her heart, the way you might make jokes about an unreliable coworker, with exasperated fondness and zero sentimentality. "It did the thing again," she'd say, settling onto the dock with a little more care than usual. "The fluttery thing. I've told it I find that extremely inconsiderate." She would then open her book, and that would be the end of the topic. She asked about my family with the directness that characterized everything she did, and I answered carefully, in the way I had been doing for decades, with truths arranged in configurations that were accurate without being complete. My father was a doctor. My mother liked to restore old houses. We moved frequently because of his work. We were private people. She accepted all of this without visible suspicion, though I noticed she filed it, the way she filed everything, cataloged, cross-referenced, returned to later. "Your brother," she said one afternoon, "the tall, quiet one. He looks at things like he's listening to them." "Edward," I said. "He's very perceptive." "Your sister looks at things like she's deciding whether they deserve to exist." "That's Rosalie. She's—" "I don't mean it badly," Wren said quickly. "She's like those people who are so accustomed to beautiful things that ordinary things are faintly insulting. But she looked at the heron the other morning. I saw her from across the beach. And she watched it for a really long time, like it specifically had earned something." I considered this. "I'll tell her you said so. It might improve her opinion of herons." "What about the big one, Emmett?" "He's looking for something to do. He needs large-scale physical activity to stay in good spirits. Marrow Lake is not optimally configured for this." Wren nodded seriously. "There's a guy at the hardware store who arm wrestles people on his lunch break. Mr. Emmett might find that satisfying." I could feel through the house that evening that Emmett was indeed at the hardware store on a regular basis, and that there had been some kind of triumphant incident involving a bet, and that he came home in a substantially better mood than he'd been in for 2 weeks. Wren came to dinner at our house, or what passed for dinner, on the 3rd Thursday of July, which was Esme's doing in the warm, inevitable way that all of Esme's best things were her doing. She had apparently encountered Wren on the main road and simply invited her, naturally and without ceremony, as though it were the most obvious next step in any reasonable sequence of events. She then made an elaborate meal that the rest of us watched with fondness, and Wren ate with genuine appreciation and compliments specific enough that Esme glowed all evening. Jasper sat at the far end of the table and was very quiet. He was always careful around humans, more so than the rest of us, though in those days he had more practice than he'd had a decade earlier, and his control was a steady, deliberate thing rather than a constant emergency. He had chosen his seat with precision, maximum distance, and the benefit of the lake breeze through the open porch door. And he spoke little, but listened thoughtfully. And when Wren made a sharp, unexpected joke about the relative merits of dying in summer versus dying in winter, it was Jasper who responded without a flicker, his voice quiet and completely level. "Summer has the advantage of duration," he said. "More light per day." Wren looked at him with sudden, serious appreciation. "Exactly," she said. "That's exactly it." After she left, after Emmett had walked her to the road and watched her drive safely away in the small, battered car she drove herself since, as she had explained, she was 16 and her mother worked evenings and nobody was going to stop her, Jasper stood at the porch rail and looked at the water. "She's not afraid," he said. "Of what?" "Any of it." He paused. "She's sad sometimes, quickly, underneath the humor. But not afraid." He turned slightly to look at me. "You've been looking ahead more than usual." He said it without accusation. Jasper watched my patterns the way I watched his, with the care of someone who understood that knowing what the other was feeling was both a gift and a responsibility. "I look ahead all the time," I said. "Ahead at specific things," he said, "or specific people." I was quiet for a moment. Around me, through the house, I could feel the particular frequencies of our family settling toward what passed for night. Esme in the workshop humming, Edward at the piano in the room upstairs, where no one had asked him to play softly, but he always did anyway. Rosalie brushing her hair with the metronomic patience of someone who had mastered exactly this particular form of stillness. "She's only got a few months," I said, "however I look at it." Jasper said nothing. He didn't need to. "I looked once," I continued, "at the shape of it, and then I stopped." "Good," he said. Not cold, not dismissive. Something more careful than either. "What you know shapes what you see. If you look too long at her ending, you'll start to see only that." He was right. And I knew he was right. And I also knew that knowing it and doing it were different problems entirely. I had been trying not to see Wren's future for 2 weeks. I had been watching her present instead, which was a thing I was not practiced at. Mortals lived so urgently in their presence that being truly in it with them felt like a different pace of existence, like downshifting into a lower gear. The family had a loose, informal conversation about our stay about 10 days in the way we had such conversations, not seated around a table like a council, but distributed through the house, voices carrying between rooms, ideas circulating until they became decisions. Carlisle said the hospital had taken to him, and there was real work to be done. He had been covering for a staff that was thin even by the hospital's own modest standards. Esme said the house was nearly finished, and she was starting to think about the garden, which was Esme's way of saying she wasn't ready to leave. Edward said he was finding the quiet useful, which meant he was finding the limited number of local minds a relief. Rosalie said from the kitchen doorway that she wanted to note for the record that she had now been to the diner twice, and they consistently undercooked their hash browns, and that this should factor into any collective decision. "It's noted," Carlisle said, and the warmth in his voice was such that Rosalie's expression shifted, briefly, into something less armored. "Stay for the summer," Jasper said. "Alice has company here." Rosalie's gaze moved to me, and I prepared for the sharpness, but she only studied me for a moment. "The girl with the heart," she said. "Wren," I said. "Yes," She turned away. Fine. The summer. 2 days after that conversation, word moved through town in the way that small-town word moves. Not through announcement, but through accumulation. One person mentioning it to another, and the second person having already heard, and the mention confirming rather than delivering the news. The old apothecary on Lake Street had reopened. A woman from away, someone said, though away was relative and no one quite agreed on where she'd come from. She had a lease, she had inventory. She sold medicinal tinctures and herbal preparations and claimed no qualifications that anyone could track down, which, in Marrow Lake, where skepticism of formal authority sat alongside genuine need, was not quite the obstacle it might have been elsewhere. The sick came to her, or sent their families. She was said to be very gentle with the suffering. Tobias Renner, the town's physician, had been the only medical presence in Marrow Lake for decades. General practitioner, delivered babies, signed death certificates, the whole single-handed span of rural medicine. He was known, Carlisle told me after his first week at the county hospital, as a precise man, careful with diagnoses, perhaps overly so for a community that often needed reassurance more than precision, but reliable, respected. I saw him on Lake Street the same morning I heard about the apothecary. He was walking with his head down against a drizzle that had been going since early morning, and I registered him the way I registered everyone. A quick forward look, a read of the broad outline of what was ahead. His future was the future of an old man, which was not surprising for someone who appeared to be in his late 70s, except that something else struck me, even as I formed that thought. There was a quality to his movement that was not quite consistent with his apparent age. Not energetic, he moved slowly, with the deliberateness of someone rationing effort. But there was something in the structural precision of his posture, the way he held himself against the weather, that did not quite cohere with the deeply lined face and the hands, which were trembling visibly even around the handle of his bag. He glanced up as I passed and met my eyes, and the look he gave me was too long and too specific for a glance between strangers. It catalogued me. It drew a conclusion. His eyes dropped first. I walked to the end of Lake Street and stood outside the apothecary. The window display was very simple. Bundles of dried herbs in small amber bottles, a card in neat handwriting listing the hours, a single wooden sign with the name painted in muted green. Varga Apothecary, Est. Again, the sign seemed to say in its unhurried typography, as though the interruption between opening and reopening were a matter of no great consequence. Through the window, I could see a woman behind the counter, speaking to someone I couldn't see from my angle. She was composed, still, neither old nor young in any definitive way that I could read from outside. She wore her hair pinned simply. She was not looking at the window. She had the quality, even at this distance, of someone who had been in whatever room they occupied for a very long time and had grown entirely comfortable there. On instinct, on reflex, with the ease of long practice and no particular intention behind it, I reached ahead and looked. I looked for her future, and I found nothing. Not a thread, not a shape, not a shadow of a decision. Not blank the way an undecided path was blank, not dark the way futures went dark for people on the outer edge of my range. This was something else entirely. This was the particular quality of a void, a space where something should have been and was not, where my gift moved forward and then simply stopped against nothing, registering nothing, as though the woman in the apothecary window were not a person with a future at all, but a place that futures went around. I stood on the sidewalk in the Marrow Lake drizzle with my hands at my sides, and the absence ringing through my perception like a struck bell. In all my years, In all my hundreds of readings and misreadings and blanks and false starts, I had never found nothing before. I did not know what nothing meant. I knew only that I had never been afraid of looking forward until this exact moment, when looking forward returned me nothing at all, and that the feeling which moved through me then was something I could not name as anything other than its simplest word, which was fear. Chapter 2. The Blind Spot. Carlisle did not speak when he came through the door that evening. That was the first thing wrong. He came in just past 7, his bag in his hand and his coat still on, and he walked to the kitchen table and set the bag down with a deliberateness that Esme felt before any of the rest of us did. She turned from the window, where she had been watching the evening fog uncouple from the lake, and looked at him, the way she looked when the news was not something that could be managed by standing up straighter. The rest of us gathered by degrees. Edward came down from the piano room, Jasper drifted from the sitting room with me close beside him, and Emmett followed, because Emmett followed any change in atmospheric pressure as reliably as a barometer. Rosalie descended the stairs without haste, which was her way of pretending she had not heard everything already. Carlisle sat. He folded his hands on the table and looked at them for a moment, and I understood that what he was doing was selecting language, which meant the thing he needed to describe was not fitting easily into the clinical precision he relied on. 3 patients died at the hospital today, he said. Not unusual in itself. It is a hospital, and we have a palliative ward, and losses happen. He paused. These were not ordinary losses. Esme sat across from him. The rest of us arranged ourselves at the periphery of the kitchen in our habitual way. Edward leaning against the doorframe, Emmett pulling out a chair and sitting on it backward, Rosalie choosing not to sit at all. The first was a woman of 52, Carlisle continued. Admitted 6 days ago for what appeared to be advanced respiratory illness. She was unwell, but not critically so when I saw her 2 days ago. By this morning, her organs showed tissue degradation consistent with a woman in her late 90s. Not staged, not the kind of decline that accumulates gradually, as though the years had arrived all at once. He looked up. I have been practicing medicine for nearly 400 years. I have never seen anything like it. The kitchen held the word arrived, the way a room holds a sound it did not know it was waiting for. 3 in a day, Edward said, not quite a question. The second died mid-morning, a man of 67, lungs like crumpled paper, the biology of 110 roughly. The tissue had just given up, wholesale, as if the life expectancy had simply been drawn forward and spent. Carlisle's voice remained measured, but there was something underneath it I had rarely heard there, a rawness that came from not knowing. The third was a child. Esme made a small, involuntary sound. Carlisle covered her hand with his. 14 years old, he said quietly. A boy who had been on the chronic care ward for most of the spring with a kidney condition. Not terminal by any standard prognosis. His kidneys when he died were the kidneys of a very old man. The attending nurses thought there had been some kind of labeling error, some mix-up of the pathology. There was no mix-up. I was watching my own hands against the edge of the counter. The fog outside had pressed itself against the kitchen windows now, dense and low, and the lake had disappeared into it entirely. Were any of them, I began, and then stopped, because I was not sure I wanted the answer. Chronically ill, Carlisle said, without needing me to finish. Yes, all 3 were long-term patients, people with pre-existing conditions. Not imminently dying, but people who had been living with their illness for some time. He looked at me very steadily. It is possible this is a cluster of coincidences explained by something I have not yet identified. I am not prepared to conclude otherwise, but I want the family to know. Emmett made a sound that was not quite a word. He turned the chair around and sat on it properly, which for Emmett indicated a shift from restlessness to attention. "Chronically ill," Rosalie said from the bottom stair. Her voice was perfectly level. "People who were already running out of time." "That's an uncomfortable way to say it," Edward said. "It's the accurate way," Rosalie replied, and her gaze moved briefly to me and away. I did not say anything. The void where Ilse Varga's future should have been was still ringing somewhere behind my sternum, and I was lining it up carefully against what Carlisle had just described. And the shape that was forming was not a shape I wanted to look at yet. 3 days passed before I saw Wren. "The weather kept her," she said when she appeared at the dock on a Thursday morning. She had been staying closer to home when the fog was heavy. Not her choice, she clarified, but her mother's, who had a theory that damp air was worse for the heart, which Wren considered medically unfounded, but emotionally understandable, and therefore only argued against on alternate days. She arrived in her battered car at 7:30 and dropped herself onto the dock planks with the proprietary ease of someone returning to a room that belonged to them. She looked tired. There were hollows under her eyes that I had not seen before, a gray quality to the skin beneath them that was not only the morning light. "You're not sleeping," I said. "I sleep fine," she said. "I just have bad dreams. There's a difference." She pulled her jacket tighter. "My chest has been hurting again, that thing where it goes tight, like someone's wringing it out. You know how you wring a cloth?" She demonstrated with her hands. "Like that, except the cloth is me." I knew. I had been trying not to think about the shape of the thing I had looked at once, and then looked away from. "Is it worse than before?" "A bit." She said it the way she said most things, factually, without soliciting anything. "But I've been taking the tonic from the apothecary, and it does help. It quiets things down, like the cloth gets a bit less wrung." She paused. That metaphor got away from me. My attention fixed on the word tonic, with a precision that had nothing to do with the morning, or the dock, or the fog on the water. "The apothecary on Lake Street," I said. "The new one, yeah, Varga. Have you been? She's got all these little amber bottles, very organized, very, I don't know. It feels like what you'd imagine an herbalist's shop smelled like 100 years ago. Not in a bad way. In a kind of settled way." Wren drew her knees up. "She's nice. She sat with me for almost an hour the first time. Asked about the heart. Asked how long. Asked what I was afraid of." A pause. Nobody asks that. They ask what the doctors say. They ask if I'm comfortable. Nobody just asks what I'm afraid of. I looked at the fog. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her I was afraid of the waiting." Wren said it simply, not looking for a reaction. "Not the dying, the waiting. All the things you accumulate waiting to find out what you are, what you like, who you might be with, and then you don't get to find out after all." She pulled a loose board splinter from the dock and turned it in her fingers. She was very understanding, very calm about it. She said that some waiting ends and some transforms, which is either genuinely wise or a bit of a dodge. I haven't decided. I was watching the water. The fog was so thick that the far shore might not have existed at all. "You should be careful," I said, and then stopped, because I had nothing to follow it with that would not require explaining things I was not yet certain of. Wren glanced at me sideways, the particular look she saved for things she had already considered. She's just herbs and tinctures and company, she said. She's not selling me anything I haven't already been offered by actual doctors, except with less fluorescent lighting and more chamomile. Has she mentioned anything else? I asked. Anything about other options? Other outcomes? Wren was quiet for a moment. Not really, she said. She said something about rest and transformation, but she says that about everything. It's her whole mode. She dropped the splinter into the water. Why? I'm nosy, I said. It's a flaw. Wren laughed, short and genuine. It's your best quality, she said. Don't apologize for it. I watched the splinter drift and disappear into the fog, and I thought about a composed, still woman asking a dying girl what she was afraid of. And I found I was not cold. Vampires are not cold in the way fear makes you cold. But I felt something that functioned like the absence of warmth, spreading outward from the center of my chest. That evening, I found Edward at the piano. He was not playing. He was sitting at the keys with his hands in his lap, the posture of someone very deliberately not doing a thing because the doing of it would be too absorbing for what was required. He looked up when I came in. I need you to do something, I said. I know, he said. He had been near enough to my thoughts to follow the shape of where they were going, even without reading them directly. You want me to listen to the woman from the apothecary. I need to know if what I found is about her or about me. I sat down beside him on the bench. The keys were cool and still under my hands, and I did not play anything. If you can hear her, if you get something clear, then my blindness is a malfunction. If you can't, then it's her, he said. He did not say it gently, exactly, but there was something in the way he framed it that acknowledged what it would mean. I'll go tomorrow. He went in the morning, while the town was still half asleep. He walked along Lake Street with his hands in his coat pockets, the same slow, slightly preoccupied pace he always used in public. The pace of a young man whose inner life was elsewhere, which was not entirely performance. He came back within the hour. I was on the dock with Wren. She had arrived early, before 7, wanting the fog, and I saw him coming along the shore path from a distance, and I knew from the way he was walking that what he had found had unsettled him. I left Wren with a vague excuse and intercepted him at the edge of the property. Static, he said immediately before I could ask. He said it with an exactness that told me he had been arranging the description on the walk back. Not the way a mind reads when it's distracted or dreaming or simply busy. Not even the way it reads when something is being actively suppressed. He paused. Like a signal that isn't resolving into any frequency I have. Fragments. Not thoughts, exactly. Impressions. Old as winters. That phrase specifically, though it wasn't in any language I can place, and the translation is approximate. He stopped walking. The borrowed hour. That came through somewhat more clearly, the shape of it at least, if not the full meaning. And something like between anchors. Not complete sentences, not even complete images, just pieces of a thing that doesn't quite fit into the categories of any mind I have read before. I stood on the wet grass with the fog on my skin and said, "Old as winters." "That's what I have," Edward said. He looked at me carefully. "You can't see her at all." "Nothing," I said. "The void doesn't have an edge. Most blanks have an edge. You feel where the knowing stops and the unknown begins. This is different. This is..." I searched for the exact word and didn't find it. As though she is a space futures move around, not a person with a fate I can't read. something outside fate entirely. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted to the register he used when he was arriving at a conclusion he did not like. We should talk to the family. We held the council that evening, after dark, when the town had mostly folded itself indoors against the rain. Carlisle had returned from the hospital with another death to add. A woman in her 60s this time, a familiar name from the chronic care ward, and the sequence was no longer possible to read as coincidence. 4 in 2 weeks, all chronically ill, all dying in the sudden ruin of decades they did not biologically possess. He had begun asking quiet questions at the hospital, careful questions that wouldn't alarm the staff, and had found that 2 of the 4 had recently visited the apothecary on Lake Street. The records for the other 2 were incomplete, but the families had indicated that friends had recommended a new local remedy, a very gentle woman who sat with them. We gathered in the sitting room, and it was not quite a council in the formal sense. We did not call it that. We did not sit in a circle. Emmett was occupying 2/3 of the largest couch, and Rosalie was beside the fireplace, and Edward was standing by the window. But it had the shape and weight of a council, and everyone felt it. I told them what I had found at the apothecary window. I told them what Edward had found when he listened. I reported what Wren had said about the tonic and the hour spent discussing what she was afraid of. The room absorbed it in layers. Jasper spoke first. He was seated with the stillness he deployed when his internal work was heaviest, the slight tension in his shoulders that told me he was managing the room's emotional temperature, not just sensing it. He said, very quietly, I cannot find a path through this that reads as safe. The room shifted. Jasper's unease was information in a way that other people's unease was not. He was not reacting to imagined danger, but to the emotional current of the situation itself, which was giving him nothing that felt like ground. In the years I had known him, I could count on one hand the times he had named that feeling aloud. Safe for whom? Emmett asked. His voice was still easy, still broad, but he had stopped sprawling against the couch cushions and was sitting upright. Because I can go to that shop tomorrow and... And what? Rosalie said. Figure out what's there, he said simply. Find it, assess it. If it's a threat, deal with it. We're not without resources. We don't know what it is, Carlisle said. Before anything can be dealt with, we need to know what we are dealing with. We know enough, Emmett said. People are dying. Something from that shop is connected. We go and we shut it down. Emmett. Carlisle's voice was mild and very firm. We know that people are dying in ways medicine cannot explain. We know that a woman has arrived in town whose nature is, by both Alice's and Edward's accounts, outside the categories of anything we have previously encountered. That is not enough to justify walking through her door and... He let the sentence complete itself. And what? Emmett said, not defensively, but genuinely curious. You're not going to say tear apart. I was going to say tear apart, but you are going to say something more diplomatic. Whatever we might do would expose us, Carlisle said. In a town of several hundred people, in a hospital where I have colleagues, in a place where this family has... He paused. We have established something here that matters. It does matter, Rosalie said. She was looking at the fireplace. Her voice had the quality it had when she was being careful with what she said, which meant she was not being careful at all. She was selecting for maximum precision. It matters that we have spent this summer in a town building attachments and routines that are now, apparently, going to require us to either insert ourselves into something dangerous and unknown or leave. She turned. I'm curious about the logic by which we arrived at that being a good situation. No one answered immediately, and the silence was the kind that had a specific weight to it. The weight of a question that was also a position. "We didn't choose it," Jasper said. "We chose to stay," Rosalie said. "We chose a town small enough that anything unusual would be visible. We chose..." Her gaze moved to me, not unkindly, or not only unkindly. "We chose to be in a place where Alice made a connection with a mortal child who was dying of a heart condition, and who is now apparently taking a remedy from a creature whose nature none of us understand." She looked away again. "I'm not angry. I'm observing that the choices compound." "You're angry," Edward said. "I'm always angry," Rosalie said. "That's not the point. The point is that we are 7 extremely noticeable people with a very specific set of things we cannot afford to have happen. And we are now in the middle of a situation that is actively risking all of them, because people in this town are dying in ways that are going to attract attention, and because the cause is something none of us can even properly look at." Her jaw tightened. "One of us cannot look at it at all." She did not say it as cruelty. I had known Rosalie long enough to know the difference. She was naming the situation. "No," I said. "I can't." "Doesn't that tell us something?" Rosalie asked. "Not of me specifically, of the room. Whatever this is, it defeats our most reliable early warning, which means we are, for the first time in my recent memory, flying without a safety net. And I want to know why we are doing that for one town and one girl with a failing heart, when we could simply leave and let whatever is happening here continue to happen in our absence." The word "continue" hung in the room for a moment. "People would die," Esme said quietly. "People are dying," Rosalie said. "They're dying right now. Carlisle's been in that hospital for 2 weeks and it hasn't slowed. Us being here doesn't seem to be stopping it." "Yet," Esme said. Rosalie looked at her. Something moved across her expression, not softening exactly, but a kind of recognition. "Yet," she repeated. "You think we can stop it." "I think we don't know enough to know yet," Esme said. "I think leaving is a choice with consequences too. And I think the people dying are not abstractions. They are someone's family, and some of them are young." She paused. "And I think Alice's friend is sick, and she is being given something by this woman, and I am not willing to drive away from that." The room held that for a moment. Rosalie said nothing for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped to something that was not its usual blade-edge register. "What I would give," she said, "to die like that. The way those people died. Even the terrible way, even the sudden way. At least they are finished. At least the question is settled." She stopped. "We don't get that. We run and hide and outlive everything we build and start again, forever. And you want me to take that on for a town full of strangers who don't even know we exist." No one corrected her. No one argued. Rosalie's grief was real, and it was hers, and it sat in the room with the same weight as everything else. Carlisle said gently, "No one is asking you to do it for strangers. We are asking you to do it because we are a family, and Alice is part of it, and this has fallen into our path." Rosalie looked at the fire again. After a moment, she made a small sound that was not agreement, but was not refusal either, and she did not say anything more. Emmett reached over and put his hand on her knee, briefly, the gesture so familiar it barely registered as deliberate. She didn't move away. "I want to be clear," Emmett said to the room, "that I still think there is a version of this where whatever is in that shop gets found and removed from the situation. I don't know what it is, but I know we're strong and fast and very hard to kill, and that has solved a lot of problems." "Not this one," Jasper said. "Not yet. We don't know enough." Emmett nodded. "So we learn enough," he said, "and then we solve it." "That's the first part," Carlisle said. "Understanding. Then we know what we're deciding." The council did not resolve into anything conclusive. It never quite did. But it moved, the way those household conversations moved, toward a decision that was more felt than stated. We would not leave. We would learn. We would not act until we understood the shape of what we were facing. Carlisle would keep his position at the hospital and track the deaths. Edward would continue trying to find a frequency in Ilsa's mind that would give him something useful. I would stay on the dock every morning, in the friendship that had started all of this, and I would watch Wren's present, because her future was not mine to force. I thought about her sitting with her knees up and the splinter drifting on the water, saying that tonic quieted things down. I thought about someone asking her what she was afraid of, and I felt the void in my gift again, that ringing absence. And I thought about the fact that I could not protect someone I could not see around. Rosalie's voice came back to me in the quiet. She is running out of time. As if I needed reminding, as if I had not looked at the shape of that ending once, and then turned deliberately away. The rest of the week moved the way dread moves, slow on the surface, accelerating underneath. Carlisle came home each evening with more. Another death on Wednesday, a man of 48 who had been admitted for complications from a chronic illness. On Thursday, 2 women from the same ward, both elderly but not imminently dying by any expected measure. Both found in the morning with the biological evidence of a life twice as long as the one they had been living. The nurses had begun to talk among themselves in the way that hospital staff talked when something was frightening them that they had no framework for. Carlisle was careful. He documented everything, raised nothing that would require official attention he couldn't manage, and came home every night and told us. The pattern, such as it was, chronically ill, admitted for existing conditions, seen or known to have visited the apothecary or received something from it. Not all of Ilsa's visitors died. She appeared to have many. The shop had been busy, and most of them simply reported feeling better. It was only some. It was only the ones who were already closest to the end of something. Wren came to the dock most mornings, not every morning. There were days when the tight cloth feeling in her chest was bad enough that she stayed home. And on those days, I sat alone and looked at the water and did not reach forward to look at anything. I had learned by now that the exercise of trying and finding nothing was its own particular kind of desolating. She mentioned Ilsa twice more that week. Once to say the tonic had helped again, and once to mention, lightly, that Ilsa had asked whether Wren had thought about what she wanted the rest of her life to look like. Not in a morbid way, she said, in a genuine way, like someone who wanted to understand what the priority was. I said it sounded like a thoughtful question. Wren said it was, actually, because most people in her life had stopped asking about the future a while ago, and it was strange and rather good to be asked. I did not tell her what I was afraid of. I did not tell her anything yet. I did not have enough to give her, and giving her something incomplete felt worse than waiting. On Friday, Carlisle asked me to come to the hospital. He wanted a second set of perceptions on a patient he was worried about. Someone admitted that morning with symptoms that were not yet catastrophic, but which were presenting in a pattern he had started to recognize. It was a careful request, and a careful reason, and I understood that he also simply wanted me near him for a few hours in that building, where things kept going wrong in ways he could not explain. I spent the afternoon in the hallway outside the palliative ward. existing quietly, listening to the sounds of a small hospital doing its careful work. Carlisle moved through the ward with his clipboard and his steady voice and his extraordinary gentleness, and I thought about what it must cost him to stand in a room with dying people and know that whatever was taking them was not a thing his medicine could address. The patient he had been watching did not die that afternoon. That was the news, and it was neither good nor sufficient, and we both knew it. I was in the ground floor corridor, pulling on my jacket to leave, when Tobias Renner came out of a door to my left. He had not seen me come in, or if he had been waiting. He had the look of someone who had been waiting, not impatiently, but with the tight, controlled energy of someone who has a script prepared and wants to make sure the setting is right before delivering it. His coat hung strangely on him, as though his body inside it had recently made some adjustment he hadn't accounted for. His hands were trembling, more visibly than they had been on Lake Street. The left hand especially, the fingers barely managing to hold a folder against his side. He stopped in front of me. He was several inches shorter than I was, and appeared approximately twice my visible age, which put nothing like a disadvantage in his eyes. "You have been here more often lately," he said. I noticed. "Carlisle's family," I said. "It's not unusual to visit." "No," he said. "No, it's not." He studied me with the same quality of look he had given me on Lake Street. That cataloging precision, that conclusion drawing. Close up, it was even more deliberate, as though he had given himself permission to do what was normally impolite. "You were on Lake Street," he said. "You stopped outside the apothecary. You stood there for almost 2 minutes, and then you walked away." "I was looking at the display," I said. "You weren't," he said mildly. Not an accusation, an observation. "You were looking ahead, which is what I've been told people like you do. And you found nothing, which I've also been told is what happens when people like you look at her." His eyes, in that heavily lined face, were oddly intent, not young exactly, but not the eyes of someone who was simply old. "That's how I knew you were the right kind of unusual." I held very still. I had a great deal of practice at holding still. "You can't see her," Tobias Renner said. His voice was clinical, unhurried, the voice of a man delivering a diagnosis. "Can you?" It was not quite a question. "What I can and cannot see," I said carefully, "is my own business." "In ordinary circumstances," he said, "yes. These aren't ordinary circumstances." He shifted the folder from his left hand to his right, and I noticed the effort it cost him, the slight lock of jaw. "I know exactly what she is. I have known for a very long time, longer than anyone in this town, longer than anyone currently living who doesn't have an investment in keeping the knowledge quiet." A pause. "And I know what I am, which is the other half of what you need to understand." The corridor was empty around us. The sound from the wards was distant and institutional, wholly indifferent to whatever was happening in the hallway near the ground floor exit. I looked at this man, at his trembling hands and his cataloging eyes, and the quality in his voice that was equal parts exhaustion and suppressed urgency. And I thought of what Edward had heard. Old as winters, the borrowed hour between anchors. I thought of the ringing void in my gift. I thought of a dying girl on a dock saying the tonic quieted things down. "Then you'd better tell me," I said. He shook his head once. "Not here," he said. "Not quickly. This isn't a thing you tell in a corridor." He reached into the folder and produced a card, which he held out to me with a trembling left hand. It was a business card. His name, the practice, an address on the opposite side of town from the apothecary. Come tomorrow. Come before she opens. She opens at 9. Come at 7. He paused. Come alone. Bring no one who reads minds, because what I have to say wants to be said before it's overheard. I took the card. It was warm from the folder, from the proximity of his hand. Good, he said, with the mild satisfaction of someone who has completed a procedure correctly. Then he looked at me for one more moment. Not the cataloging look, something slightly different. You can't see her, he said again. Good. That means you're the only one who can help me. Because I know exactly what she is. And I know what I am. And I cannot get near her alone. He turned and walked back toward the ward without waiting for a reply, the folder held against his side, his steps measured and deliberate against the linoleum. I stood in the corridor with his card in my hand. Outside, the fog had returned, heavy and purposeful, blotting the lights of the parking lot into soft smears. I stood on the hospital steps and looked at nothing. And I thought about a woman in an apothecary, asking dying people what they were afraid of, and a future that was a void, and a physician with a trembling hand who had named himself as something, and on reflex, out of need. I reached forward and found the same bright, ringing nothing I had been finding for 2 weeks. I turned the card over in my hand. The letters were very clean and precise, the handwriting of someone who had learned it at a time when that mattered. I put it in my pocket and walked into the fog. Chapter 3. The Year Right. Tobias Renner's practice occupied the ground floor of a narrow, clapboard building on the far edge of Calder Street, set back from the road behind a spruce hedge that had gone unpruned long enough to lean inward and give the whole front walk the feeling of a passage through something that did not particularly want you to enter. The paint on the shutters was the yellow of old paper. The brass plate beside the door read his name and the word physician in lettering that had once been very fine. It was 4 minutes before 7 when I reached the front step, and the town around me was still and damp, the lake fog having pulled itself inland overnight and not yet decided to retreat. I had told Jasper I was going out early. That much was true. I had not told him where, and he had looked at me with that still measuring quality he carried when he was reading an emotion rather than letting it go. And I had kissed his jaw and left before he could ask the question his face was already forming. The guilt of that was a small, clean stone in my chest, and I carried it the 8 blocks to Tobias Renner's door. The light inside was already on. I could smell old wood, old paper, the particular dry dust of a place that sees careful but infrequent cleaning, and beneath all of that, something animal and iron-rich, the smell of a man whose blood had changed, whose body was doing something it was not supposed to do. Not the smell of sickness, exactly. The smell of time accelerating. I knocked. He opened the door in the time it would have taken a healthy man half his apparent age. He had dressed with the same deliberateness he brought to everything else. Pressed shirt, his coat already on. A man who considered receiving company a formal matter, regardless of the hour. His hands were worse in the morning light. The left one gripped the door frame briefly as he stepped back to let me in, and I understood the grip was not proprietary. It was necessary. You came alone, he said. I said I would. He looked past me into the street anyway, which told me everything about whether he trusted my word. Then he turned and led me back through the front room, past a waiting area with 4 chairs and outdated magazines, past a closed examination room, and into a study at the rear of the building, where floor-to-ceiling shelves held books in several languages and stacks of folders bound with cord. A desk lamp burned yellow warm over a surface covered in papers. Two chairs faced each other across a small space, and Tobias lowered himself into the one nearest the desk, with the careful mechanics of someone managing pain and concealing it by choice. "Sit," he said. I sat. I did not need to, and the position was somewhat uncomfortable for a person whose circulation ran cold and still. But it put us at the same level, and I wanted to watch his face. He studied me for a moment. Then he said, "You've been looking at her since the apothecary opened, looking ahead as you do. And every time you look, there's nothing. Nothing I can describe as a future," I said. "A void." "Not a void," he said, "a discontinuity." He settled back and laced his fingers together in his lap, the tremor visible in both hands now, more pronounced when still. "She doesn't have a future, in the sense your gift uses. She doesn't belong to any single fate. What you look for when you look ahead, a probable path, a shape of decisions. She has none of those, because what she is made of belongs to dozens of dead threads, hundreds, centuries of borrowed time stitched together into something that moves and breathes, but generates no original fate of its own." He said all of this the way he would have described a clinical finding. Your gift returns nothing, because there is nothing there to return. She isn't hidden from you. She's simply not there in the way your sight requires. I held that. I had been afraid for 2 weeks that the void meant something had broken in me, some damage I couldn't name. Understanding that the fault was not mine was a particular relief, and I noticed how quickly I felt it, and how much I had wanted not to. "Then what is she?" I asked. He unfolded his hands and looked at them for a moment. "She is what she has always called herself, when she has been honest, which is rarely. A year-right." The word sat between us like an object placed on a table. "She takes time. Specifically, she takes what's left of it. The unspent years of the dying. The people who still have an open thread of fate, a path not yet closed, even if that path runs only weeks or months. She tithes those years, a portion of whatever is left. It keeps her from unraveling into the actual age she carries, which is somewhere north of 400 years. "The patients at the hospital," I said. "Yes." He said it simply, without drama. "Chronically ill. Not immediately terminal, that matters. She needs an open thread, not a closed one. The thread has to still be running, however thinly. She sits with them. She speaks very gently. She offers her tonic, which quiets discomfort. And she tithes. They age. They die at the age they would have reached decades from now, within hours." He paused. "The tonic, to be precise, contains nothing supernatural. It does quiet the symptoms. That part is simply herbalism. She's been doing this for a very long time." "The patients who hadn't been to the apothecary," I said. "She makes house calls," Tobias said, "for those who cannot come to her. She presents as very attentive." He produced a slight, controlled expression that was not quite a smile. "She is, in her way, very attentive." I looked at him, at his lined face, at the way his coat hung on his shoulders, at the tremor, and I put it together with what he had said the evening before. "I know what I am." "You're the heir," I said. "The outgoing one." Something shifted behind his eyes. He had not expected me to arrive there so quickly. He decided, visibly, to respect it. "For 34 years, he said. She arrested my decline. A heart condition, something like a slow valve failure, which would have killed me by 62 at the outside. She stopped it. For 34 years, I was her anchor.
Her procurement, she would have said. I found the people she needed. I smoothed the way. The clinical tone had not changed, but there was something underneath it now, a pressure held back by years of practice. 14 days ago, she released me. The decline is reversing. What I've lost in 14 days represents... He stopped and looked at his left hand. The years reassert themselves very quickly.
The room was very quiet. Outside the spruce hedge, a bird was making a tentative exploratory sound about the morning. I watched Tobias Renner's left hand continue its slow, involuntary work. And the new heir, I said, is someone she's already chosen. Wren Kowalczyk, he said. Yes. I had known it. The way you know a thing you have refused to let yourself think directly. The knowing had been sitting in me since the first morning Wren mentioned the tonic, and I had been building walls between myself and it with both hands. Hearing the name in his voice dismantled the walls. She can't be an heir, I said. The logic you described, open thread, unspent years, Wren is dying. Her heart is failing. Yes. He did not apologize for the plainness of it. That's precisely why she qualifies. You've understood this backwards. Ilse doesn't spend the heir's time. The heir is not the source of what Ilse feeds on. Other dying people are the source. The heir is the anchor. What Ilse does to an heir is arrest the decline, stop the process that's killing them, hold them in an extended present. A dying girl's heart simply stops failing. Ilse feeds on others to sustain herself, and the heir merely keeps her tethered to the present, a living mortal thread that holds her inside the current moment, rather than drifting loose into the accumulated weight of everything she carries. He folded his hands again. In fact, she prefers the near death for this purpose. A person who has almost run out of time is eager. They will consent to almost anything. And their thread, however thin, is still open, still unwritten enough to serve as an anchor. I thought of Wren on the dock in the early morning, her feet hanging over the water, making jokes about her own funeral flowers. I thought of a girl who had told Ilse she was afraid of the waiting, the accumulation of questions she would not get to answer. She's already offered it, I said. It was not quite a question. She's offered the first part of it, Tobias said carefully. She's offered relief, a way to not die. She won't have told the girl the full terms yet. She never does. The full terms come incrementally. The procuring, the anchoring, the service. And by the time the heir understands what they've consented to be, the arrest has already happened, and backing out means accepting the accelerated reversal. He looked at me with those old young eyes. I speak from considerable experience. I stood. I didn't mean to. I simply could not remain in the chair. The room was too small, and Tobias Renner's voice was too even, and I had a very strong need to put my hands somewhere, to press them against something solid. I turned to the nearest bookshelf and put 3 fingertips against the spine of a large bound volume. Tell me why I can approach her, I said. My voice was level. I was proud of that. Because she cannot sense you, he said, and his voice carried the first note of genuine warmth I had heard from him, not for my sake, but for the elegance of it. Her harvesting sense, the way she finds the dying, locates the open thread, operates on mortal time, on unspent mortal years. You have none. No mortal years move in you at all. You are, to her perception, simply not there. You don't register as prey, and you don't register as a threat. She cannot ward against you, because she cannot see you to ward. a pause. You can stand in front of her, touch her, and she will not feel you coming. None of the dying can do that. I certainly cannot. She knows my thread better than I do myself, and she can keep me at distance by will. I turned around. You want me to do something at the borrowed hour, I said. Whatever that is. He nodded once, and he opened his mouth to answer, and I held up 2 fingers. Not yet, I said. I need to see Wren first. He accepted this. He told me the borrowed hour before I left, but I will return to that. Because what happened with Wren is where it mattered, and I need to keep the sequence honest. I went to the dock. She was there, as she usually was, having arrived sometime before 7:30 with her thermos and her terrible novel, which she had been reading to spite herself for 2 weeks because the protagonist made choices Wren found both catastrophic and compelling. She was sitting with her legs pulled close against her body, which was something she did on the mornings her chest was worse. She looked up when I crossed the dock and said, "You're early. You look like someone told you bad news and then asked you to run a mile." I sat beside her. The lake was flat and gray-silver, and the fog was breaking up over the far shore. "The tonic helps," I said. "More than it did at first?" Wren set her book down. She looked at me with that particular quality she had, the directness that did not leave room for pretense. "You're asking something underneath that." "I am," I said. A pause. The water moved against the dock pilings with a soft, irregular sound. Wren pulled one knee up and rested her chin on it. "She said there was more she could do," Wren said. "More than the tonic. That for some people who were very sick, she had something she could offer that wasn't a treatment. Something more like a..." She stopped. She called it a different arrangement. Wren's voice was very level. She said my heart could simply stop failing. That she'd met people whose bodies had given out in the way mine is giving out, and she had a gift for that. That some people live a very long time. "And you said?" "I said I'd think about it." Wren looked out over the water. She wasn't pushy about it. She was very calm. She said it was a serious decision, and she didn't expect an immediate answer, and that her door was open when I was ready. A small pause. She also said that the people who took the arrangement became a kind of assistant, a help to others who were sick and frightened. That it was purposeful. She glanced sideways at me. That part she knew was important to me, which means she was listening when I said what I was afraid of. "She was," I said. Wren looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Alice, what do you know that you're not telling me?" And there it was, that clear, unhesitating directness, asking me the question I had not yet earned the right to answer. I was not ready to answer it. There were things I still needed to understand, things that needed to go before the family and through Jasper's steady judgment and Carlisle's careful moral reasoning. And beyond that, beyond all of the procedural reasons, there was the fact that I did not yet know how to give Wren the truth without giving her other truths she was not in a position to receive. Truths about what I was. Truths that would cost my family in ways I could not calculate without my sight. "I'm afraid she's not telling you everything," I said. "I'm afraid what she's calling an arrangement has conditions she hasn't mentioned." Wren absorbed this. She didn't argue. She turned it over the way she turned most things, with that unsentimental, examining intelligence. "What conditions?" she said. "I don't have all of them yet," I said honestly. "When I do, I'll tell you." She held my eyes. Wren was very good at holding someone's eyes. "Alice," she said, I'm not in a hurry to say yes, but I'm also not in a hurry to say no. Do you understand the difference? I understood it completely. That was the problem. I stayed with her for an hour, mostly in the quiet that was its own kind of conversation, until she said her chest was better today and she was going to drive out to the lake road and back, which was what she did when she wanted to feel the ordinary motion of being somewhere. I watched her go, her battered little car pulling out onto the road in the damp morning, and I stood on the dock and let myself feel what I had been not feeling for 2 weeks. I had looked at Wren's future once, on the 7th morning of our friendship, and registered the end point and turned away. I had told myself this was respect for her privacy, and it was, but it was also something else. It was that I could not look at a mortal death from the inside, at a human life arriving at its right and proper conclusion, without something in me clenching tight and pulling inward, and naming that clenching by a word I did not want to use. Envy. I envied Wren her death, the way Rosalie envied every human woman her ordinary life. Not because death was something you should want, but because it was something you were supposed to have. A completed arc, an end that belonged to you. I had been turned in an asylum, alone, with no memory of the life that came before, and no knowledge of the hands that gave me this one instead. Whatever death had been waiting for me, whatever shape my human ending would have taken, the bed I might have died in, the people who might have sat beside me, it was gone, taken cleanly, and I had nothing to mourn because I had nothing to remember. My grief was for a vacancy, a human Alice-shaped absence at the end of a story I couldn't read. Ilsa was feeding on that grief. She was not feeding on mine. I had no open thread to tithe from. But she had found a girl who carried that same hunger in a different form, a hunger for ordinary future, and she had walked up to that hunger with open hands and offered to fill it. Not honestly, not completely, but enough that a frightened, dying girl would say, "I'll think about it," rather than no. I recognized that. I recognized the wanting to say yes. And recognizing it was the thing that frightened me more than the void in my sight. I went back to Tobias Renner. He was at the window when I returned, looking out through the gap in the spruce hedge at the narrow strip of street. He turned when I came in without knocking, and sat again in the chair across from his, and I said, "The borrowed hour. Tell me now." He came back to his chair. The morning had advanced, and in the increased light he looked worse. Or perhaps I was simply watching more closely. The lines in his face had a quality that good medical care could not have produced in the span of 2 weeks. They were deep and specific, the kind that accumulate over years of the same expressions, and they had arrived all at once, like sediment that had been held in suspension and released. "At the new moon," he said, "once each generation, she must release the outgoing anchor and take the new one. There is a window. She calls it the borrowed hour. During that window she is unanchored, released from the old thread and not yet bound to the new. And during that window, she is vulnerable." He said the word deliberately, tasting the significance of it. If no willing heir consents before the hour closes, the years she carries dissipate. She unravels into her true age. 400 years of time that has been held at bay comes home at once. I watched his face as he said this. There was something in it I had noticed before, a particular warmth of emphasis, a leaning forward of attention, when he spoke of the loosed years, of what happened to those stored centuries. It was there again now, barely perceptible. The way a man's voice changes when he is describing something he wants. "When is the new moon?" I asked. 5 days, he said. And you want me to be there, at the borrowed hour, because I can approach her where you cannot. She needs to be held, he said, long enough that no air can reach her in time. Long enough that the hour closes. You can hold her where I cannot, because she cannot feel you coming. You are, as I said, invisible to her senses. He met my eyes with that clinical steadiness. It's a simple matter of making certain no air consents before the hour runs out. I did not ask what he intended to do with himself while I was doing the holding. I stored that question beside the warmth in his voice, and the left-hand tremor, and the careful absence of certain explanations. And I said I needed to speak with my family. He looked at me sharply. "The one who reads minds," he said. "Among others," I said. He pressed his lips together. I was already standing. "What I've told you," he said, "is a strategy, not a thing to be debated." "Everything is a thing to be debated," I said pleasantly, and left. The lake house was full when I returned, which meant all of them were home, because in a house with the Cullens, there is no such thing as empty. Esme was in the kitchen with a cup of something warm she had made for the smell of it and the habit of the hands. Edward was at the piano and stopped when I came through the door, which meant he had already caught the shape of my thoughts from the drive back, the particular texture of what I was carrying. I gathered them in the sitting room. Jasper came to stand close to me and said nothing, which was its own form of statement. Carlisle sat forward with his hands folded. Rosalie was on the window seat, her legs drawn up, watching me with an attention that was both precise and guarded. Emmett was in the doorway to the hallway, which was where he stood when he was agitated, and trying not to look it. I told them everything, all of it, from Tobias's study at 7 in the morning, to the dock with Wren, to what Tobias had said about the borrowed hour. I told them what he had named: the year right, the tithe, the anchor, the air. I told them about the incoherence between his bearing and his body, and the way his voice changed when he spoke of the loosed years. And I told them that Wren had been offered the arrangement, and had not yet answered. The room was quiet for a moment when I finished. Emmett said, 5 days. So we go to the apothecary in 5 days and... You cannot fight her, I said. There's nothing to fight. She isn't vulnerable until the hour. She's vulnerable in a storefront on Lake Street right now, Emmett said. She's one woman in a shop. She isn't a woman, Edward said from his chair. She's not anything I've encountered the edge of before. The fragments I heard, old as winters. Emmett, she is 400 years old and held together by the time of the dying. A physical assault before the ritual accomplishes nothing except possibly driving her to Wren immediately and accelerating the binding. Emmett was quiet for a moment. If we drive her away before Wren says yes, she finds another desperate person, I said, in another town, and the next generation finds her with the same problem and less to go on. So what ends it? Emmett said. The stolen years end it, I said. No consenting heir, no anchor. The hours she's borrowed come home. I had heard it in Tobias's voice, the elegant conclusion, the years dissipating. And in my own voice, I could hear the thing underneath it that made Emmett straighten and look at me, and that made Jasper turn very slightly toward me from his position beside the window. Not the logic of it, the longing in it. The same longing that had been in Tobias Renner's voice. The wish to see the years released. The wish to see someone's stolen immortality come undone, their borrowed time returned. And behind that wish,
if I pressed on it honestly, the wish that someone could do the same for me. Pull the time I'd borrowed from my own human self. Return me to whatever I had been supposed to be. Carlisle was watching me with the quality of attention he reserved for complicated diagnoses. I looked at him and shook my head once, not enough for anyone else to read. He understood. Tobias Renner wants something, Edred said. He knows what Alice can do, and he's placed her in the architecture of this very carefully. I want to hear him directly. He told her not to bring you, Jasper said. Yes, Edred said. He did. The sitting room absorbed this. Rosalie, on the window seat, said, "The girl has not said yes." "Not yet," I said.
Rosalie looked out at the lake. Her profile against the gray window was very still. "What happens," she said quietly, to the water more than to the room, "when a person has nothing left to lose by saying yes?" Nobody answered that, because there was no answer that wouldn't have been cruel. On the evening of the second day, while the new moon moved closer and the fog came and went, and Carlisle documented 2 more impossible deaths at the hospital, both chronically ill, both new to the county, both of whom had mentioned a visitor. Wren came to the lake house. She came in the way she had begun to come after the first dinner, through the back, around the dockside, appearing at the kitchen door like someone who has decided a place is familiar enough not to knock. Esme received her with the particular warmth that Esme brought to everything Wren shaped, which was the warmth of a woman who understood that certain presences are worth treasuring while they last. I sat with Wren at the kitchen table while Esme found something hot to offer, and found an occupation elsewhere that was transparent in the kindest possible way. "I went back to see Ilse this morning," Wren said. I kept my hands flat on the table. "She told me more," Wren said. "She said that the people who took the arrangement, the ones who became her assistants, she'd known some of them for decades, that they were the most purposeful people she'd ever met, because they knew exactly what their work meant to others. She said I would understand that better than most people." Wren looked at her tea. "She said I had a particular quality of attention, that I would be good at it." "Being good at something," I said carefully, "isn't the same thing as knowing what it costs." Wren looked up. "She told me about the cost," she said. "Which cost?" I asked. "That I'd be her," she said, "companion. That there were things she'd need from me, help with the people she worked with. That it would be, in her word, a partnership." Wren turned her tea mug in a slow circle. She didn't tell me what that looked like in practice, but she didn't pretend there was nothing required. No, I thought. She never lies about the existence of the requirement, only about what it really means. "Wren," I said, "did she tell you how long the arrangement lasts?" A brief pause. "A very long time," Wren said. "Did she tell you what happens when it ends? For the person who took the arrangement?" The mug stopped turning. "No," Wren said slowly. She didn't. I held the next thing for a moment, the next question, the thing I needed to know before I could give her anything more. I had been building toward it for 2 days, and I had not yet decided how to cross the space between watching Wren's present and protecting her future, without doing the thing I could not yet afford to do. What I knew, what I was still a wall between us, and I was not ready to dismantle it, not without Carlisle, not without Jasper, not without the family's agreement and the full understanding of what that dismantling would cost them. So I held it, and I said, "She's very good at telling you the parts you're ready to hear."
Wren studied me. "You know more than you're ready to say," she said. "Yes," I said. "Are you going to tell me?" "Yes," I said. "I promise." "Not yet."
She looked at me for a long moment, with that direct, examining gaze that never demanded more than it needed to, but always demanded exactly enough. Then she nodded once, the same nod she gave when she had decided to trust something against her better instinct, and picked up her tea. We sat for a while in the kitchen while Esme moved gently around us, and the lake made its small sounds outside. And I thought about Wren's hands wrapped around the mug, warm and mortal, and improbably alive. And I thought about what those hands would do if they never aged, what work they would do in the service of a centuries-old hunger. And I thought about my own hands, cold and still on the table, and whether the difference between us was as clean as I had been telling myself it was. The borrowed hour, Tobias had said. 5 days, now 4. That night I sat alone on the dock in the full dark, after Wren had gone and the house behind me had settled into its particular nocturnal texture. Edward's piano, very low. Jasper's reading. The creak of Esme and Carlisle's voices somewhere above. The lake was very dark and very flat, and the fog had come in close, and I sat with my legs over the edge of the dock the way Wren sat, feet hanging over the water. And I thought about all the mornings I had sat here looking ahead into human futures and finding them desolating. What desolated me, I understood now, was not their brevity. It was their completeness. On reflex, out of the habit of needing to know, needing to see, I reached forward and found Wren. Her future was there, heartbreakingly short, heartbreakingly itself. A thread of weeks, its shape still the same, ending in the way it had always been ending. And beside it, opening now, where nothing had opened before, a second branch. A path that did not end where the first path ended. A path that moved forward and then simply ceased, not because it concluded, but because it passed out of the range of what I could see. Out of the range of any fate I knew how to read. The void. Ilsa's void. The future in which Wren consented. Wren had not chosen. She was still in that open space between the paths, the place where she had been since she told Ilsa, "I'll think about it." And the branch was a possibility rather than a direction. And there was still time. But the door was standing open now, and through it was the same silence I found every time I looked at the apothecary on Lake Street. The same bright, ringing nothing. And I understood for the first time what it meant to see a life about to leave the world of mortal fate and enter something that had no fate at all. No completion. No name in any ledger of what living is supposed to be. I looked at both paths, the short one ending in the right place, and the long one ending in the void. And I thought about which one I would choose for her if I were the kind of creature who made that choice. The thought arrived and I examined it, and I let it leave without giving it permission to stay, because I knew what it was. I knew it from Tobias's voice, from the warmth he brought to the loosed years, from the precise and careful architecture by which he had placed me where he needed me. I knew it from the thing in myself that had been listening to Wren on the dock for weeks and mourning a death I had never gotten to have. I wanted Wren to live. I wanted it so badly that it had started to feel like a reason, and a reason could become a justification, and a justification could become the exact shape of everything I needed to refuse to be. The fog lay heavy on the lake. Somewhere across the water, a light was burning in the old boathouses, orange and tentative. I sat with my feet hanging over the dark, and I held my own wanting steadily in view, like a stone you hold open-palmed so you know exactly how heavy it is. 4 days until the new moon. I put my hands on the dock boards and felt the wood, cold and wet and old, holding itself together under the simple, honest weight of existing. Chapter 4. Borrowed Time. The morning before the new moon, I learned that Mrs. Peltier had died. I had spoken with her only twice. Once by the post office when she had asked whether I was one of the summer people, and once on the lake path when she had been walking a very small dog and had told me, with a dry satisfaction that reminded me faintly of Wren, that the dog's name was Admiral, and he had no respect for the rank. She had been 71 years old and chronically ill with a circulatory condition that had kept her housebound most mornings. Carlisle came home in the gray hour before the rest of town woke and told me quietly, before I could hear it from anywhere else, that she had presented overnight at the hospital and died before morning in a state of biological aging far beyond her 71 years. Her tissues, by every measure available to him, belonging to a woman of 115. He said her name, and then he sat down in the kitchen chair and did not move for a long moment, his hands still and his golden eyes very dark with something that looked, even on a face that does not work the way a human face does, very much like grief. I thought of the small dog named Admiral, and who would walk him now? Carlisle had barely set down his bag when two things happened in close succession. The first was that Edward came downstairs and told us, in his measured and precise way, that two investigators from the state medical examiner's office had been at the hospital the previous afternoon. He had read the hospital administrator's thoughts during a meeting that morning. The examiner's office was calling it an epidemiological cluster. 12 deaths in 17 days, all presenting with extreme sudden biological aging. No pathogen identified, no toxicological basis anyone could name. They had requested Carlisle's case notes by end of week. They intended to send a field investigator. Carlisle received this information the way he received most difficult information, with stillness and a brief internal calibration. And then he said, evenly, that he had been expecting it, and that it would need to be managed carefully. The second thing was that Rosalie appeared in the kitchen doorway, and I realized she had heard everything. She looked at Carlisle for a long moment, then at me, and her expression held the specific quality of a person who had been waiting for confirmation of something they had already decided was true. She did not say anything immediately. She went to stand at the window that faced the lake, and the morning light found the angles of her face the way it always did, like it had no choice. And she stood there with her arms crossed and did not speak, and the silence was more exact than anything she could have said. The family gathered in pieces. Jasper came first, reading the room before anyone spoke. Emmett came down from the second floor at a pace that suggested he had been listening from the landing. Esme came in from the back hall with garden dirt on her hands and washed it off at the sink without comment, taking her place near Carlisle at the table. Edward remained in the doorway. 12, Emmett said, once Carlisle had explained the examiner's inquiry. 12 people, and we're still sitting here. We're still sitting here, Jasper said quietly, because tearing Ilsa Varga apart on Lake Street would not end this. Jasper is right, Edward said. Killing her isn't the issue. Killing her without denying her the binding is. Emmett looked between them, that particular expression he wore when a problem refused to present itself as something to be handled by sheer force of will. So explain it again. She tears apart the same as anything else. She can be destroyed, I said. At the borrowed hour, unanchored, when her hoarded years have nowhere to go. But if she's killed before the hour, the loosed years don't disappear. They're still there, still loose. Whatever is standing closest to the harvest at the moment of death stands to catch them. I paused. And Tobias Renner would be standing there. The room was quiet.
Emmett looked at the table.
"You cannot fight a hunger," Jasper said. "You can only refuse to feed it." Emmett sat back in his chair. He did not argue. He turned his coffee mug a slow half-rotation and stared at it, and I watched something shift in him. Not defeat, which was not something Emmett permitted himself, but a recalibration. The specific, effortful look of a person applying their considerable energy to a problem they have realized cannot be solved by hitting it. Rosalie had not moved from the window. She said without turning, "The examiner's investigation is not Ilsa's problem. It is ours." "Yes," Carlisle said. "They will want to speak with you at length. They will look into your background, your credentials, your history. And if they look at any of us closely enough, for long enough—" "Yes," Carlisle said again, gently. "I know." She turned from the window then and looked at him, and the grief in her face was the kind she wore only for Carlisle. The specific pain of watching someone she loved put himself in the path of things he could not stop. "Then we should go," she said. "We should have gone when this started. We should go now." "Rose," Esme's voice was soft. "I'm not wrong," Rosalie said. She wasn't performing it. She said it plainly, the way you state a fact that you know will not be heard and are too honest to soften. No one told her she was wrong, because she wasn't. The examiner's inquiry was real, and it was tightening, and it would not go away. And Marrow Lake was becoming untenable regardless of what happened on the new moon. The family understood that. It settled in the room like a stone settling into still water. "We stay until this is done," Carlisle said. "And then we go." The meeting with Edward and Tobias happened that afternoon. I called Tobias from the Lake House landline and told him that my family wished to speak with him. That one member in particular had questions he needed to answer directly, in person. There was a silence on the line that was careful rather than surprised, as though he had considered the possibility and filed it somewhere. "Your associate with the particular gift," he said. "Yes." Another silence. "Tomorrow morning, my practice, before the office opens." I told him we would be there at 6. Edward and I went alone, which was not a choice I made lightly. Jasper wanted to come. I asked him not to, and he studied me for a long moment and then agreed, though the set of his jaw told me precisely what he thought about it. What I did not say, and what I did not need to say, was that Jasper's presence at a meeting with a dying, bleeding, terrified man would require a degree of conscious effort from Jasper that I did not want consuming his focus. Edward had no such complication. Edward's control was architectural. Tobias's practice was a 2-room office above a shuttered insurance agency on the far side of town, up a flight of wooden stairs that announced every footfall. He was already at the desk when we came in. He looked, in the pale morning light, markedly worse than he had 3 days ago. The skin of his face more papery, the tremor in his hands more pronounced, his eyes sitting deeper in their sockets. He tracked the speed of the change the way a pilot tracks altitude, constantly, without comment, with a specific quality of controlled dread. He looked at Edward. Edward looked at him. The room was very still. I watched Tobias's expression, the careful professional mask he wore at all times, shift almost imperceptibly, the way a locked door shifts in the frame when there is weight on the other side. He felt it. He could not possibly know what it was, not with any precision, but he felt the exposure. 34 years in the service of a creature who fed on hidden things had given him unusually refined instincts about when something was reading him. Edward said nothing for a long moment. He stood with his hands at his sides, and he listened to the interior of Tobias Renner's mind with an attention so complete it looked like patience. Then he said, "Tell me about the promise she made you, the succession." Tobias's jaw tightened. Not with denial, with the particular muscular response of a man who has been carrying something painful for a very long time and has just been asked to put it on the table. "She told you the faithful anchor may ascend," Edward said quietly. "That if you served long enough, if you came to the borrowed hour ready, you could take the loosed years for yourself, drain a fresh, unbound air to prime the vessel, catch what she releases." Tobias looked at me. "You told him?" "I didn't know," I said, which was true. "Not the specifics." "She planted it," Edward said, "early in your service. She fed it to you over years, kept it warm enough that you never questioned it, that you never looked too closely at whether a body already running down on borrowed time could receive anything at all, let alone hold it. You are dying, Dr. Renner. Your mortal fate is sealing shut. A depleted former anchor cannot catch what a year-right releases, because the loosed years require a mortal thread still open enough to receive them. Your thread closed the day she released you." The silence that followed was one of the longer ones I had ever sat inside. Tobias's hands were still on the desk. The left one trembled. The right one did not, quite. He was looking at the surface of the desk with the expression of a man doing a precise internal calculation, running numbers he had run before, and arriving at the same result he always had, the result he had staked his remaining time on, and hearing, for the first time, the possibility that the calculation itself was wrong. I watched his face. I watched him decide not to believe it. "You're doing exactly what she would do," he said. "You're telling me a comfortable lie to make me cooperative." "I'm telling you what's in your own mind," Edward said. "You know she lies to her anchors. You've watched her do it. You know the promise is the mechanism that keeps the dying obedient. And you have convinced yourself. You have put enormous, costly effort into convincing yourself that you are the exception. That she told you the truth because of the 34 years. Because you were faithful." Tobias looked up. His eyes were very clear in the way that eyes are when a person has moved past a certain kind of pain into something colder. "She didn't tell me the truth," he said. "She told me what she told all of them. But I know something the others didn't." He looked at me. "I know what actually stands in that room that can hold her. And I know how to get it there." He inclined his head slightly, meaning me, meaning the girl I would bring him. "The calculation still works. You're the variable that changes it." Edward said, "You intend to drain Wren." "I intend to use what is available." He said it with the flat, clinical precision of a man describing a procedure. "She's dying regardless. I need a fresh, viable mortal. She qualifies." I did not move. I am very good at not moving. "You told Alice the goal was to close the hour without a consenting heir," Edward said. That was the part Alice heard. What you did not say was that you meant to drain Wren yourself during that window, while Alice held Ilsa, while no one was watching the girl. "It's not a secret," Tobias said, still looking at me. "I told you what you needed to do. I didn't tell you every step in my part of it." He paused. "You need me. You don't know the ritual well enough to do it without my guidance." "I know the shape of it," I said. My voice was remarkably steady. "You know the outline. I know the mechanics. Where to stand, when the window opens, how long it holds." He leaned forward slightly, and the tremor in his hand pressed against the desk. "I'm dying in a matter of days. I have nothing left to lose by telling you exactly what I intend. You have the girl. You have the ability to hold the creature. You have everything I need, and you know it. What I'm offering you is the road to the same result. The Urite doesn't get her anchor. The hour closes. Her centuries come back to her. The difference is only in what happens to me. The difference, I said, is that Wren dies. He looked at me with something that might, in a different kind of man, have been pity. She dies anyway, he said. You know that. We did not resolve anything in that room. We left Tobias in his office with his trembling hands and his careful, doomed arithmetic. And we walked down the wooden stairs into the gray Vermont morning. And Edward and I did not speak until we were well past the shuttered insurance agency and onto the main road. He believes it, I said. Completely, Edward said. The succession promise is the only future he has. He has spent 34 years shaping himself around it. He cannot afford to disbelieve it. He paused. He is also not wrong that his guidance would be useful. I know. And he is also going to be in that room tomorrow night, regardless of what we do. I know, I said again. We walked for a moment in the quiet of the early morning, the lake visible between the boathouses, flat and gray as pewter. Alice, Edward said carefully, what are you going to do about Wren? I looked at the road ahead. A long, straight road, its edges blurred by fog. What I should have done 3 days ago, I said. I went to the apothecary first. This was deliberate. There were things I needed Ilse to confirm before I spoke to Wren, things that would change what I had to say and how I said it, and I was not willing to give Wren information I hadn't verified at its source. I pushed open the apothecary door at 11 in the morning, 2 days before the new moon, and the small brass bell above the frame sounded its single pure note, and the smell of the place came at me. Dried herbs and beeswax, and something underneath, faintly sweet, that was not any plant I could name. Ilse was behind the counter, decanting something from a glass bottle into a row of smaller glass bottles. She looked up when I came in. She smiled, warm, unhurried, the smile of a person genuinely pleased to see someone she had hoped to meet. You must be Alice, she said. I've been hoping you would come in. She was exactly what she presented as. A small, composed woman in her apparent 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the careful, gentle movements of someone who handled breakable things professionally. Her hands on the glass bottles were steady. Her voice carried no urgency, no flicker of anything that was not entirely maternal and kind. She was, I reminded myself, approximately 400 years old, and had aged 12 people to death in this town alone this summer. I've been curious about your work, I said, which was true, though not in the way I allowed my voice to suggest. Come in, then. There's nothing to be nervous about. She gestured gently toward the wooden chairs near the window. Sit with me. I sat. She sat across from me, and she looked at me with the attentive, generous patience of someone who has learned to wait for people to find their questions. And for a moment, I simply looked back, because there was something genuinely extraordinary about her. Not the power, which I had understood intellectually but now felt as an atmospheric pressure in the room, a quality of the air around her, but the face. 400 years of choosing patience. 400 years of framing predation as mercy, choosing victims who were grateful to be chosen, learning exactly what each frightened, dying person needed to hear before they said yes. The face was what that practice looked like on the outside. It was the most convincingly kind face I had ever seen. You know Wren, she said. I do. She speaks of you warmly. She trusts you.
Ilse tilted her head slightly, still smiling. I think you know why I chose her.
Her attention, I said. Her willingness to want more than what she's been given. She sees clearly, Ilse said, with genuine pleasure. That's rare. Most people, when they're frightened, narrow. She opens wider. She set her hands in her lap, unhurried. I think she will be very good at this. She hasn't said yes yet. No, Ilse agreed. She's careful. That's also a quality I value. She paused. Have you come to advise her against it? I've come to understand it, I said. What you're offering her, the precise terms. Something shifted, fractionally, in her expression. Not alarm, but the recalibration of a creature that has been navigating conversations like this for centuries and knows when to adjust its footing. The terms are simple. Her decline stops. Her heart stops failing. She works with me, travels with me, helps me find people I can ease. And when the arrangement ends? All arrangements end, she said gently. Everything does. What happens to her when this one does? Ilse looked at me for a moment with an expression that was almost, not quite, respectful. You know more than you should, she said, not unkindly. I know enough, I said. Tell me about the timing, the new moon. A pause, very brief. The binding requires a specific condition, she said carefully. The unanchored hour, I said. The new moon. The smile did not disappear, but it became something different, more considered. She was not afraid of me, because she could not feel me, could not read me, could not locate me in the network of living time she navigated the way I navigated visions. I was not there to her senses, a cold hole in the room where a person should be. I watched her process that and decide I was not a threat. You can't bind her early, I said. You can't accelerate it to protect yourself. You need the unanchored window. That is correct, she said with equanimity. And you can't take an heir who hasn't freely consented. I would never take anyone who had not freely consented, she said. And I believed her, which was the most frightening part of the conversation. She meant it. The consent was real, and the gift was real, in the way that a trap with genuine bait is still a trap. What I offer, she continued, is relief. What I ask is companionship and a particular kind of work. Wren is dying. I am offering her the one thing no one else can. You're offering her a lease, I said. You're not telling her it expires. Everything expires, she said again. And this time the gentleness was very precise. I looked at her. She looked at me. The afternoon light came through the apothecary windows in flat, diffuse panels, and somewhere behind me, the small bell above the door was still. You are very difficult to read, she said. There was nothing threatening in it. It was simply an observation, spoken with the mild curiosity of someone noting unusual weather. I know, I said. I stood up and she made no move to stop me, because she didn't need to. She was certain of the new moon, and she was certain of Wren. And she had spent centuries being patient, and one more conversation with a curious, cold stranger was not going to alter her composure. She has not yet said yes, I said. No, Ilse agreed. But she will. Wren was on the dock when I arrived at the boathouse. She was sitting with her knees pulled up and her chin resting on them, watching a pair of loons work the far edge of the cove, and she did not look up when she heard me. She had learned my footstep by now, the particular weightlessness of it. But she shifted slightly to make room beside her. I sat down next to her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. You have your telling me face on, Wren said. I have a telling you face? You get very still. Stiller than usual. She glanced sideways at me. And you looked at me twice when you sat down, which you don't usually do. She was fiercely observant. It was one of the things I had loved about her from the beginning. I'm going to tell you the truth about Ilsa's arrangement, I said. All of it. And then I'm going to tell you something else. Something harder. Because the two things are connected, and you can't have the full picture of the first without the second. Wren looked at me steadily. Okay, she said. I told her what happens to the anchor when it ends. I told her about Tobias Renner, the physician she had seen at the hospital, the man with the shaking hands, and what 34 years of arrested decline looked like when it reversed in 14 days, and what it looked like when the reversal finished. I told her what the procurer's work actually required: the finding of the dying and the frightened, the guiding of them toward the apothecary and the tonic and the patient, listening question about what they feared losing. I told her that the 12 people who had died at Carlisle's hospital this summer had not died of their illnesses accelerating. I told her they had died because their remaining unspent years had been taken from them, aged into a woman who had been doing this for 400 years. Wren did not speak during any of this. She looked out at the lake. When I finished, she said, "She didn't mention any of that." No. The dying part at the end. The other people dying. No. A long silence. A loon called from the far end of the cove. Okay, Wren said. Her voice was low. What's the other thing? I had been sitting with this for days. The space between knowing I would say it and saying it was its own kind of distance. Not the hesitation of a coward, but the held breath of someone who understands exactly what a door is before they open it. I need you to understand something first, I said. What I'm about to tell you is something that can't be untold. It puts you in possession of information that has real consequences for people I love, for all of us. And I'm choosing to tell you anyway, because you can't evaluate what Ilsa is offering you without understanding what immortality actually costs. I paused. Not the version she's selling. The thing itself. Wren turned to look at me then, fully, with that direct, examining gaze. I'm a vampire, I said. The word sat in the afternoon air over the lake. Wren looked at me for a very long moment. Then she looked at my hands on the dock boards, pale, still, not quite right, and then at my eyes, and I watched the pieces she had been accumulating since the beginning come together with the particular quiet click of someone who already suspected the shape of the thing and had been waiting for the name. Your family, she said. All of us, yes. Carlisle is a doctor, yes. Does that... She stopped, processed. He doesn't... We don't feed on people, I said. We never have. Carlisle has practiced medicine for over 300 years. She was quiet for another moment. Then she said in her most deadpan voice, "The cold hands thing, that's just a symptom." Something cracked open in my chest. Yes. And the never eating anything, and the way Jasper looks at me sometimes like he's doing math. I'm sorry about Jasper, I said. He tries very hard. Okay, Wren said. She breathed out slowly, carefully, the way she breathed when she was managing her heart. Okay, I believe you. I don't know why I believe you so quickly, except that I've thought you were something for a while, and I was letting myself not think about it. She looked back at the water. What does that have to do with Ilse? I was turned decades ago, I said. I don't know exactly when. I don't remember my human life. I woke up as this. I gestured at myself. And there was nothing before it. No childhood, no history, no memory of the people I must have loved, or the fears I must have carried, or what my own death might have felt like. I looked at my hands. I grieve a life I can't remember, a death I never got to have. And I tell you this because I want you to understand that immortality, even a freely chosen, genuinely desired immortality, costs something that cannot be named before you pay it. You give up everything that was going to happen at the end of your life, including the end itself. And the end is not a small thing. The end is when everything you were amounts to something, and you give it back. I had not said that out loud before, not to anyone, not even to Jasper. Wren was very quiet. Ilse's version is worse, I said. In Ilse's version, you give the end back on a schedule she sets. You spend however long she grants you, gathering the dying toward their death so she can eat their years. And when she's finished with you, your body crashes through every year of decline she held at bay, all at once, and you die in days. I paused. I'm not telling you this to make the choice for you. I'm telling you because she wasn't going to. Wren looked at me for a long time. There were things moving in her expression that I did not try to name. Then she said, "The people who died. The 12 people." Yes, she would have been the one who sat with them. Before. Tobias was, I said gently. That was his work. He was the one who brought them to her. That would have been your work. Wren nodded. Once. Slowly. The nod she gave when she had decided something against her better instinct. Except this time, it was not against her instinct. This time, it was simply the nod of someone acknowledging a weight they had to pick up. I need to think, she said. I know. Don't tell me it's going to be okay. I won't, I said. We sat for a while longer on the dock, and the loons moved further out across the gray water, and the fog was coming in early from the far shore, and neither of us spoke. After a while, Wren unfolded herself and stood up and walked back toward her car without saying goodbye, which I understood was not coldness, but the specific, focused quiet of a person who has been handed a very heavy thing and is carrying it with both hands and can't spare the attention for social formality. I watched her go, and the wanting rose in me, sharp, familiar, the same wanting I had been holding all week, and I held it exactly where it was, open-palmed, and I did not let it move. The family council that evening was the worst one. Rosalie had spent the afternoon with Wren. I had not known that. Esme told me quietly when I came in, watching my face for something. Esme said Wren had arrived at the back dock while I was at the apothecary, and Rosalie had been the only one home, and rather than send her away, Rosalie had sat with her on the back porch for 2 hours. I did not ask what they talked about. Rosalie was in the kitchen when I came in, and she looked up at me with an expression that was not softened exactly, but that held something new inside the hardness. A hairline fracture, a thing she had not allowed for and was still deciding what to do with. I told the family everything. Edward confirmed Tobias's plan as I described it, with specifics. The intended positioning, the timing, the belief in the succession that Edward had read directly from the source. Jasper listened with his arms crossed and his jaw very still. Carlisle set his hands flat on the table and kept them there. Emmett looked at the window. When I got to the part about Wren, the room changed temperature in a way that had nothing to do with the evening air.
You told her, Carlisle said. Yes. No one spoke for a moment. The word sat in the room the way it had sat on the dock, just there, unretractable. Alice, Jasper said, and the way he said it was not anger, which was somehow worse. It was the voice he used when he was frightened for me. I know, I said. The Volturi. I know what I did, Jasper, Edward said from the window where he had moved during my account. She's going to die. Within the year, likely within months. The risk of a breach.
Edward. My voice was quiet. He stopped. She is going to die, I said. You're right. And she cannot weigh what Ilse is offering against anything real if I don't give her the real. She needed to know what immortality costs because she's being sold a version of it. I gave her the truth, and I accept what that means. Rosalie said, "You've put all of us at risk for one girl." Yes, I said. I have. She looked at me for a long moment. She was not wrong, and I was not going to tell her she was. The grief in her face and the anger were both real and both fair, and I looked back at her steadily and did not pretend otherwise. It doesn't matter whether she speaks, Carlisle said finally. The room shifted. She won't, I said. I believe that.
It doesn't matter, Carlisle said again. His voice was precise and gentle and absolutely certain. We cannot stay here regardless. The examiner's inquiry is already in motion. Our time in Marrow Lake was running out before this summer ended. What Alice did does not change the outcome, only the reason. He looked around the table. We leave when this is done. The hospital, this house, everything we built here this summer. We accept that cost. Esme, beside him, said nothing. She reached across and put her hand over his, and that was all. Emmett said, "Where?" "I'll find something," Carlisle said. "I always do." Rosalie stood up. She walked to the window and stood with her back to the room for a moment. And I watched her shoulders, and thought about the 2 hours she had spent with Wren on the back porch. And I thought about what it might mean to a woman who had spent decades mourning a human death, to sit with a girl who was genuinely, irreversibly, going to have one.
I'm going to say this clearly, Rosalie said, still facing the window. Alice took a risk with our lives that was not hers to take alone. I think she was wrong to do it without asking us. I think it is going to cost us more than we know, and I think we will be paying that cost for years. She paused. And I think Wren Kowalczyk is not going to say a word to anyone, and that the reason she won't is exactly the thing that makes Alice wrong, and also... She stopped. A brief silence. I'm not finished being angry about it. No one asked her to be. We shield Alice at the ritual, Jasper said. We don't let Tobias reach Wren. Emmett looked up from the table. That I can do, he said. His voice was quieter than usual. That is something I can actually do. We sat together in the kitchen of the Linkfist house, 5 vampires and 1 empty chair that had become Wren's chair. And the lake made its small sounds beyond the window, and Carlisle mapped what came next in his careful, humane way. And I thought about the home Esme was halfway through restoring, the roof she had repaired, the garden plan she had drawn in her careful architectural hand. I thought about the piano in the front room, and the way the light came through the east windows on overcast mornings. I thought about the dock. We would leave all of it. We had agreed to leave all of it. And the agreement felt clean, the way a real cost always feels cleaner than an avoided one. Not painless, but honest. Not free, but paid willingly, which was the only kind of payment that did not compound into debt.
The next morning was the last morning before the new moon.
I spent it alone. Not on the dock. I was giving that to Wren, those last ordinary mornings, and I had learned enough about the difference between holding on and letting things be themselves. I walked the long path around the north end of the lake instead, the one that went past the old resort boathouses and the rusted public pier, and I let Vermont be exactly what it was. Gray and humid and going to seed, the faded resort town with its boarded-up charm and its slowly emptying life. Beautiful in the specific way that things are beautiful when they are declining. I thought about the human life I could not remember. I thought about it directly, without flinching from it. Whatever I had been, a girl who had fits of foresight and was locked away for it, a girl who was afraid of something she could only see in fragments. She had not gotten to finish. She had not gotten to grow old in the particular way that Wren was not going to get to grow old, accumulating answers to the question she was afraid she would never get to ask. She had died unfinished. I had been envying that for decades. Not the death specifically, but the completion of it, the being done, the way it meant something, the way Rosalie had said to give anything to be finished. But standing on the rusted pier with the fog on the water and the borrowed hour a day away, I understood something I had been edging around without being able to say it plainly. The girl in the asylum had not been robbed of her death. She had been robbed of the time before it. And what I had been given, however it was given, however unasked for, however costly, was time. A great and unreasonable and possibly unearned quantity of time. And what I did with it was the only answer I was ever going to be able to give to the question of whether it was worth it. You could not earn it after the fact. You could not pay it back. You could only decide, morning by morning, what you gave to it. I stood on the pier for a long time, and the fog was very still, and I did not reach forward into the future because there was nothing to see except the void. And the void was enough for now. The void meant the borrowed hour was still ahead of us. Ilsa was still unbound. Wren had not yet chosen. The night came in quickly, the way nights do in late summer when the days have started shortening. And I spent it in the house, near Jasper, near the family, anchored to the particular warmth of being among people I loved. Edward played something very quiet in the front room. Esme moved through the kitchen. Emmett sat on the back porch with the lights off, watching the tree line. And I understood that he had been doing this for days, and I had not noticed, posting himself without being asked. The right use of his attention. At midnight, when the house was as settled as it ever got, I stood up from the reading chair where I had been sitting, not reading, and I told Jasper I was going to walk. He looked at me. He set down his book. "I need you to trust me," I said. "I do," he said. "That's not the same as not worrying." I kissed him, quickly, briefly, the specific tenderness of a touch that is also a promise. And I went out the back door into the dark. The borrowed hour would open at moonrise, less than 20 hours away now. I had told myself I was going to walk the lake path again, was going to clear my head, was going to arrive at tomorrow rested and clear. But my feet carried me down Lake Street with the specific directness of a person who has been putting something off and has run out of time to put it off any longer. And when I reached the apothecary, its windows dark, its sign still reading open from the afternoon, I pushed the door. The brass bell sounded. The room smelled of dried herbs and beeswax and the sweet underthing. Tobias Renner was already inside. He stood near the back counter in the dark, and there was a small blade in his right hand, a physician's blade, handled and deliberate, the kind that was meant to be used precisely. His left hand was tucked into his coat pocket, hiding the tremor. His face, in the dim light from the street, was the calmest I had ever seen it. "I hoped it would be you," he said. "I wasn't certain, but I hoped." He smiled, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has planned a long time for a particular moment and finds it arriving on schedule. "I thought we should get our positions clear," he said, "before the hour opens." Chapter 5. What the Hours Are Worth. The blade was the size of a scalpel, handled like one too. Something made for precision rather than force. It would do nothing to me, and Tobias had to know that, which meant it was not for me. "You want me to hold her," I said, during the unanchored window. He said it the way he said everything clinical, as though the fact of it were simply obvious, and the only remaining question was logistics. 30 seconds, perhaps. Enough for the work. And Wren. He did not answer that directly, which was itself the answer. He moved a half step to his left, putting the counter behind him. Not threatening, not yet. Just adjusting his position in the dark room, the way a man does when he wants to feel that his back is against something solid. "I know where she is tonight," he said. "I know what she has been told. You are very thorough, Alice, and very well-intentioned, and I am not certain it will be enough to dissuade her." He paused. "Ilse is extraordinarily persuasive. 34 years is a long time to know someone." "She can't bind Wren before the hour," I said. "You told me that." "The hour is 7 hours away." His voice stayed even. "What I am saying is that the girl may still choose. She may walk into that room herself before you can reach her." He was not wrong. He was trying to make me afraid of the same outcome he was, Wren consenting, so that I would see his plan as the lesser harm. It was a very precise kind of reasoning, the sort that only works if you do not look at what he needed Wren for. "What you are describing," I said carefully, "is killing her." "I am describing a transfer." The clinical tone tightened fractionally. "The vessel must be primed. Ilse taught the mechanism herself. It is not pleasant, but it is killing her," I said again. He looked at me for a long moment. The tremor in his left hand shifted his coat pocket slightly, a small, involuntary flag. Then he said, with the weariness of someone who has come to a decision he made much earlier and is only now announcing it, "I had hoped you would see this as a shared interest." "I don't." "Then we are at an impasse." "No," said Edward from the doorway behind me. "We are not." I had not heard the bell above the door. Vampires are quiet when they choose to be, and Edward had chosen, and he was not alone. Jasper stood 2 steps inside to my left, very still, and behind him I could see Emmett's outline filling the frame. Tobias's eyes moved to Edward with the specific fear of a man who has been told once that his mind can be read and has tried not to think of it. "I know everything you intended tonight," Edward said. He was not raising his voice. He never raised his voice when it mattered. "And I know what you believe. I told you once that it cannot work, that a depleted former anchor's mortal fate is sealing shut, that the loosed years have nowhere to enter you. You chose not to believe me." "It is Ilse's mechanism," Tobias said. "I watched it work." "You watched her do it once, 34 years ago, to you. You were dying. You were not yet sealed. You were viable." Edward stepped further into the room, not rushing,
moving like he had all the time in the world to say one more clear thing. You are not viable now. What you would take from that girl would kill her and give you nothing. The body you are carrying cannot receive what you are planning to catch.
Tobias's face did not change. That was the thing that startled me most, I think. The way it did not change. He had heard this before and made his choice before, and the hearing of it again simply confirmed, in his private calculus, that we were trying to make him cooperative by denying him hope, and that the denial itself proved the hope was real. It was almost sad. It was almost entirely terrifying. He lifted the blade, not at me, not at Edward. He was looking past us toward the door. I moved before Emmett did, but only just. I stepped between Tobias and the door, not to protect myself, but to break his line of sight and his line of motion, and Emmett's hand came down on Tobias's wrist with the specific gentleness that Emmett had learned to use with people, the careful, calibrated grip that held without breaking. The blade dropped to the floorboards. Tobias did not struggle. He had already spent most of what he had. "That's all right," Emmett said quietly, and that was all he said. Tobias looked at the blade on the floor. The tremor in his left hand had moved into both shoulders now, and I could hear, very faintly, the laboring of his heart. I had been hearing it since Chapter 1 without knowing what it meant. The arrhythmic catch that his arrested decline had been suppressing for 34 years, now resuming its work. He had days, perhaps less. "The hour still opens," he said. "It does," I agreed. "That's not going to change what I do in it." Jasper crossed to me without a word, and I felt the specific warmth of his hand at my back, not steadying me, but simply present. And I leaned into it for exactly 1 second, and then I straightened. "We need to be at the apothecary before moonrise," I said to the room. Emmett kept hold of Tobias. The moon was new, and therefore invisible, and the sky was the particular dense black of a Vermont night in August with cloud cover, and the air smelled of pine and lake water, and the specific cooling that happens in the hour before dawn gives way to something else. We walked down Lake Street in a loose formation, Emmett and Tobias ahead of me, Edward to my right, Jasper behind. Carlisle and Esme had the house. They were waiting. That was where Wren was, and I had told Esme before I left that Wren might come to the dock by herself before morning, and to let her, and to give her whatever she needed. I did not know if Wren had decided. The 2 branches of her future were still there when I looked, the short thread ending in weeks, and the second branch disappearing into the void Ilsa generated. Neither had collapsed into the other. She was still choosing. The apothecary was lit from inside when we arrived. A low amber light, the kind that came from the standing lamps Ilsa kept near the back counter. The sign in the window read "Open," and I thought, absurdly, that it would always read "Open," that Ilsa had not once changed it since the day she arrived. She had been open for business since the 17th century and did not intend to stop. She was standing at the center of the room when I pushed the door, not behind the counter, in the open floor, as though she had been waiting and did not mind being seen waiting. She looked at the 5 of us and at Tobias, and her expression moved, briefly, just barely, before settling back into its habitual serenity. It was not fear. It was recognition. She had known he might try this. "Tobias," she said, and her voice was the same mild, unhurried thing it always was. The voice of someone who had lived long enough to find urgency slightly embarrassing. "You look terrible." "Yes," he said. He was not angry. He was past anger, I thought. "I offered you more time than I gave anyone." She looked at him with something that was almost pity, and I reminded myself that pity was not the same as love, and that what she had given him for 34 years had been a use and a leash and a lie that kept him walking forward on her behalf. The promise. Was it true? He asked. She looked at him for a long moment. Did you believe it? She asked finally. That isn't the same question. No, she said, but it is the more useful one. Edward made a sound that was not quite a word. I stepped forward to put myself between Ilse and the rest of the room, not because she was threatening anyone. She wasn't, not yet. Her power still bound inside her, the unanchored window still minutes away. But because I wanted her attention on me and nowhere else. I was the thing she could not read. A cold hole in the room where a person should be, she had said, with the mild curiosity of someone noting a gap in the wallpaper. I was the variable she had decided was no threat. I intended to let her keep believing that for exactly as long as I needed. Where is Wren? She said to me. Not here. She will come. The certainty in it was absolute. I had heard her say this before, and it had frightened me. Now it only made me very clear about what I needed to do. I expected her before now, truthfully. She has more capacity for sitting with difficult knowledge than most people twice her age. She does, I agreed. She also has more capacity for seeing through something than you're giving her credit for. Ilse tipped her head. She is a dying girl, Alice. I am not offering her a trick. I am offering her time. You're offering her your hunger, dressed up as a vocation. Something shifted in the air then. Not temperature, not sound, but pressure. A change in the quality of the dark outside the windows, and I felt it in the same place I felt my foresight. Somewhere below thought, a register that wasn't sense, but wasn't nothing. The new moon was crossing its peak. The borrowed hour was opening. Ilse changed. It was not dramatic, not violent, nothing so obvious as a monster revealing itself. It was more like watching a person whose posture has been held carefully for a very long time simply stop holding it. Her stillness became a different kind of stillness. The thread she had been tethered to, Tobias, the anchor that had just been released, was gone. And in its absence, she was untethered in a way that showed in the air around her, in the slight wrongness of her outline, as though she existed in the room a fraction of a second after the room did. I moved, not toward the door, not toward Emmett or Edward. I moved to Ilse, and I put both hands on her, one at her forearm, one at her shoulder, and I held on, and she went very still. She could not sense me the way she sensed mortals, could not read the thin thread of living time that a human body runs on. And so to her I was simply two cold hands with an extraordinary grip, which was not nothing, but was also not everything I was. She did not panic. She tested the hold once with a controlled lateral shift and found it absolute, and then she went still again. This is not what I expected from you, she said. I know. Tobias. She said his name without turning her head. If you are going to do what you planned, now is the time. Tobias looked at Emmett's hand on his wrist. He looked at the blade on the floor, still lying where it had dropped. He looked at me. Let me go, he said to Emmett. No, Emmett said. It was the plainest, gentlest no I had ever heard him give. The loosed years. Tobias's voice had dropped. The arrhythmic catch in his heart was louder now. I could hear it clearly over the quiet of the room. If I don't catch them... You can't catch them, Edward said from his place near the counter, and his voice was not unkind. It was simply clear. I am sorry. The mechanism requires a mortal whose fate is still open. Yours sealed when your decline resumed. The years will dissipate. They will not enter you. He paused. She knew this when she made you the promise. She has made every anchor the same promise. She uses it the way she uses the tonic. It doesn't lie about what it does, only about what it costs and what it ends in. Tobias looked at Ilse. She did not look back at him. Her eyes were on the door. I heard footsteps on the sidewalk outside, light and slightly uneven, the specific rhythm of someone whose chest made them careful on unlevel ground. The bell above the door sounded. Wren stood in the doorway. She was wearing a flannel shirt that was too large for her, and her hair was loose, and she had driven here alone, in the small, battered car, in the middle of the night, without telling anyone where she was going, which was the most Wren thing she had ever done. She looked at the room, at Tobias in Emmett's grip, at Edward and Jasper flanking the counter, at me with both hands on Ilse. And her expression did the thing it did when she was processing something she intended to make a dry remark about later, and was not ready to yet. "Okay," she said. "This looks like I'm just in time." "Wren," I kept my hold on Ilse. "You don't have to be here." "I drove 17 blocks," she said. "I'm here." She looked at Ilse. Something passed between them. The long, specific consideration of a person who has been deciding about another person for a long time, and is now arriving at the end of the deciding. "Esme told me where you'd be." I had not asked Esme to do that. I had not needed to. Ilse's voice, when she spoke, was the same patient warmth that had always been, even now, even held. "Wren, you've thought about what I offered." "I have," Wren said. "And you've thought about what she told you." A small gesture toward me, constrained by my grip. "Alice does not remember her own life. She grieves something she was never given. That grief is real, and it is hers. But it does not mean what she thinks it means about what I am offering you." "I know," Wren said. "She told me that too. She told me everything, including that she'd be telling me what she wanted me to think, and that I should take it or leave it on my own terms." Ilse went still in a new way. I felt it in the tension beneath my hands. Not panic, not anger, but the specific recalibration of someone who has been certain of something and has just found the certainty is less solid than they believed. "Wren," I said, and my voice came out quieter than I intended. "Whatever you've decided, it's yours." She looked at me. In the low amber light, her face was 16 years old and tired, and entirely, terribly clear. "Alice," she said. I watched Tobias Renner try to walk across this room and not make it. Across the room, Emmett's grip on Tobias was no longer strictly necessary. Tobias was leaning against the counter, both hands braced on its surface now, the tremor past hiding. His breathing had changed. The heart I had been listening to all summer was working very hard and producing very little. "He believed her for 34 years, Wren said. He gave her everything she asked for, and she gave him 34 years of false time and a story about how he'd get to keep it." She paused. "I'm not interested in that bargain." "What I offer is not what I offered him," Ilse said. Her composure was holding, but it was holding the way ice holds in late March. Still intact, but with effort you could hear. "You would be the anchor, not a depleted..." "And then the next one would be the anchor," Wren said. "And then whoever comes after. And somewhere in those 400 years, there are all the people who ended up like him." She nodded at Tobias. "No. You are dying," Ilse said. "Yes. Wren said it the way she said everything true and difficult, flatly, without ceremony, without flinching. I know. I've known for a while. She looked at me again. I didn't ask for a trade. My throat, which did not work the way a human throat works, but which I have learned still carries things, closed around something I did not have words for. I thought about the girl in the asylum. I thought about the years I had spent in this body looking at everyone else's futures, steering and adjusting, and trying to make things go right, and the way I had turned that same hungry attention on Wren from the beginning, wanting her future to be longer, wanting to give her time, wanting to want it for her sake rather than for the unbearable familiarity of seeing a life cut short. I had given her the truth instead. I had put it in front of her and let her hands be the ones that lifted it or set it down. I let go of Ilse, not because I was finished, not because the hour had passed, because Wren had spoken, and a free refusal was more than a hold. The air had to consent. The air had chosen. Ilse stood very still for a long second. Then she took one measured step back. The borrowed hour was still open. She was still untethered. She was not helpless. She could flee. She could seek another body to pour herself into. She could move through the night and find someone willing before the window closed. I watched her calculate this in the set of her chin and the direction of her eyes. The door, the night, some other room, some other dying person. There is no one else, I said. Not tonight. There are no more patients in this town who don't know what you are. Carlisle had been very quiet at the hospital in the last few days, very particular about who he spoke to, what he said. His medicine was impeccable and also deliberate. Ilse looked at me. For the first time in all my encounters with her, something moved in her face that was not serenity, not patience, not the long, slow confidence of someone who has survived every previous difficulty. It was older than that. It was the recognition of an end. "You are not afraid of me," she said. "No," I said. "I'm not." The hour was closing. I could feel it the way you feel a change in pressure, not with the eyes, but with the whole of you. The borrowed threads were pulling loose. Centuries of them. All the thin, stolen hours from all the dying people, in all the towns, in all the years before Marrow Lake. And they had nowhere to go now. No anchor, no successor, no open vessel consenting to receive them. They went back, not to any particular body, not in any way that could be traced or caught. They simply released, the way debts release when there is nothing left to demand payment from. And what remained was what had always been underneath. A woman of ordinary biological age, which in Ilse's case was not a number I could calculate, but was certainly large, and the accumulation of 4 centuries without rest, arriving all at once in the space where a single, unguarded second had opened. She did not scream. That was the thing I remembered longest, I think. She simply became very small. And then she became very still. And then she became the kind of still that is the end of motion, rather than the pause between motions. The amber lamps kept burning. The room smelled of dried herbs. I heard Tobias slide down the front of the counter to the floor. Emmett's hands caught him before he hit, and he sat there with his back against the cabinet and his legs extended, and his face turned toward the window. And for a moment, he looked like nothing so much as a very tired man resting. The heart I had been listening to beat twice more. Then it did not beat again. Jasper crossed to me and took my hand. "Are you all right?" he said, very quietly. I thought about it. "Yes," I said, and found that it was true. Wren was standing in the middle of the room, not looking at Ilse's remains, not looking at Tobias. She was looking at the counter, at the row of glass bottles with their careful handwritten labels, and her expression was the one she made when she was filing something away, a fact she intended to keep, to turn over later, to understand better in the morning. "So that's it," she said. "That's it," I agreed. "Huh." She looked at me sideways. "You know, for someone with no memory of being human, you are remarkably good at giving people bad news." I laughed. It surprised me, the laugh. Surprised both of us, I think, from the way her mouth curved in response. It was not a large laugh or a long one, but it was real, and it was the right thing for that room at that hour, and I was grateful for it. We left the way we had come. The hours between the ritual and the actual morning are ones I remember the way you remember a dream in pieces. Not the sequence of them, but the texture. Edward making 3 calls from the house, his voice low and steady, the kind of voice he had developed over 100 years of being the one who handled necessary transactions with the world. Carlisle arriving from the hospital at around 3 in the morning, still in his white coat, and going very still when I told him what had happened. And then sitting down at the kitchen table and putting his hands flat on its surface and being silent for a long time. Esme bringing Wren tea without being asked. Rosalie standing in the doorway of the kitchen with her arms crossed, not speaking, watching Wren the way she watched things she had not quite decided about. Wren wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at Rosalie directly. "You were right," she said, "for the record, about Alice taking the risk without asking." Rosalie was quiet. "She was also right," Wren said, "about the other thing, whatever that is worth to you." Rosalie looked away, toward the window, toward the lake. "It is worth something," she said finally, which was not the same as forgiveness, and was not meant to be. The state medical examiner's field investigator arrived on a Tuesday, 4 days later, and found a consulting physician who had resigned his hospital post and a family in the process of vacating a seasonal rental. The death cluster had stopped. The last 12 cases were documented and bewildering, and would remain so. No pathogen identified, no environmental cause established, no common factor beyond the patient's own serious prior illness. The investigator spent 3 days reviewing Carlisle's impeccable, thorough, honest case notes. She found nothing actionable. She was thorough and intelligent, and ultimately could only file what could be filed, an unresolved anomaly in a town she would probably not think about again. The kind of statistical shadow that every county accrues over time and can never entirely explain. Carlisle shook her hand on his last day at the hospital and drove back to the Lindqvist house and stood in the driveway for a long time, looking at the lake. The packing took longer than it should have, because Esme kept stopping. Not from grief exactly, or not only from grief. She stopped the way she always stopped when leaving a place she had built something in, taking the full account of what she was giving up before she gave it up. The garden plan remained in a kitchen drawer because she could not quite bring herself to take it. The roof she had repaired would shelter whoever came after. These were the things she said aloud, quietly, to no one in particular, while she moved through the rooms. I did not know where we were going. The family had talked about Maine, had talked about further north, had talked about waiting and seeing, which was usually Carlisle's preference when the map was open and the pressure was off. The Volturi's attention had not turned our way. The breach had not registered, or had registered too small against the steady noise of the world, or the fact that no human had been left alive knowing what we were had closed the question before it opened. We told ourselves this. We knew it was not quite a certainty, that some watcher somewhere might still catalog a question mark in a file, and we would carry that weight forward and deal with it when it arrived. In the meantime, Wren came every morning, not to the dock but to the house, and Esme made coffee she didn't drink and set out the breakfast things for Wren, while the family moved around the edges of the kitchen, too loud and too large, and entirely accustomed to being too much for any room. And Wren ate and talked, and did not once, not in any of those mornings, say anything she should not have said. Rosalie sat with her on the back porch on a Wednesday, and I did not listen to what they said. It was not mine to hear. When Wren came inside an hour later, her eyes were red, and Rosalie stood at the porch railing with her back to the house for a while afterward. And when she came inside, she moved through the kitchen without looking at me, and put a hand briefly on my shoulder as she passed. Not forgiveness, not absolution. The honest acknowledgement of two things being true at once. I had taken a risk with their lives. Wren had been worth knowing. Both. Always both. Emmett, in the last week, carried Wren's books to the car after every visit and argued with her about horror films with the seriousness of someone who had extremely specific opinions about monster efficacy. And she demolished every argument he made with a deadpan precision that left him delighted and baffled. And I thought that whatever particular brand of strength he had worked out how to use that summer, this was part of it too. The way he simply showed up and was large and funny and entirely himself, without asking anything from it. The weeks were quiet. They were the specific quiet of late Vermont summer going to early autumn. The light changing, the water cooling, the faded resort town becoming even more itself in the way that decline always intensifies when you stop resisting it. The county hospital continued its modest business. The apothecary on Lake Street was locked. The sign in the window still read "Open for 3 days," until someone from the town clerk's office came and removed it. Wren's heart did not improve. The arrest had been Ilsa's work, and it had been real. And now that Ilsa was gone, it was simply gone. And the tight cloth feeling came back, and her color came and went, and her mother drove her to the cardiologist in Burlington on a Thursday, and came home and cried quietly in the kitchen while Wren made tea and told her about a documentary she had watched the night before. Very focused and precise, the way she always was about the things she could not fix. She had good weeks and difficult ones. We stayed past when we had said we would. Nobody named this. We simply stayed, and the boxes were packed, and the house was emptied room by room, except for the kitchen, and the room where Edward had played piano, and the back porch. And Wren came every morning, and the kettle went on, and the family arranged itself around her the way family does, not making a ceremony of it, but also not pretending it was ordinary, because it was not ordinary, and she deserved to have that acknowledged. She died on a morning in October, which was earlier than the worst predictions, and later than the most worried ones, which seemed right for her, splitting the difference with characteristic practicality. I was beside her bed when it happened. Her mother was there, and a nurse she liked, and the window was open because she had asked for it to be open. She looked at me in the last hour, when her mother had stepped out for a moment, and she said, dry and absolutely clear, in the voice I had known since July, "You're going to be fine, you know. Wren, I'm serious. You've been doing the worried face for 3 hours." She closed her eyes, then opened them again. "You have a very long time. Use it for something better than worrying about me." I held her hand, which was warm in a way my hands would never be. And I thought about the girl in the asylum who never got to finish growing up, and the decades I had spent holding that loss like a stone, turning it over, wondering what it meant about what I was owed and what had been taken. I put the stone down. Not for the first time, not finally, not in any way that meant I would never pick it up again, but for this morning, in this particular room,
with this particular girl who was choosing the end she had been given and carrying it with grace. I set it down.
She died with the window open and the October light coming through, and her mother's hand in hers. And I stood back and let her have it. All of it. The whole of the mortal ending that was entirely hers. I stayed until the light changed. The family was gathered at the Lindqvist house when I returned. The last night, the remaining boxes in the front hall, the cars loaded except for the final pass through the rooms to make sure nothing was missed. Carlisle was on the phone in the study, completing whatever professional formality remained. Esme was in the garden she had planted and would not harvest, standing very still with her hands at her sides, saying her particular goodbye to the things she had made. I walked down to the dock. The lake was absolutely itself in October. Still, gray, the water so flat it looked solid. The boathouse behind me was empty the way it had always been. 4 years of quiet and the weathered boards going silver in the damp. Wren's chair, the one that had been Wren's, was gone because it had always been her own that she'd carried from the house each morning. The dock was simply a dock again. I looked out at the water and I let myself grieve. Not the small private grief I had been carrying for decades like something I was not sure I had permission to put down. The loss of the girl. The loss of the life. The loss of the ordinary dying that had never been available to me. But the real one. The whole one. The grief for Wren, and for the summer, and for the home Esme had built, and the family's careful life here, and the 12 people whose ages had been taken, and who had died afraid. And for Tobias Renner, who had believed a beautiful lie for 34 years, because it was the only future he could hold. All of it. The whole accounting. Then I looked forward. The void was gone. Where Ilsa had been, there was nothing now. Not absence, not blank, but the ordinary texture of a world that moves in its own time, not borrowed, not stitched from stolen hours. The road ahead opened the way roads open when the weather has cleared and the light has come back. Not promising an easy journey, not promising anything, just showing the ground as it was and letting you walk on it. I saw the family loading the last of the cars, not in detail, but in outline. Emmett at the rear of the larger vehicle, Rosalie brushing something from her coat sleeve, Edward holding the front door. I saw Jasper on the porch, looking toward the dock, and the expression on his face in my vision was the same expression he always had when he looked for me and found me. The private relief of a person who has learned not to take the finding for granted. I saw a road. Maine, I thought, or wherever the road went. Years of it. Not the sentence I had been serving. Not the penance for a life I didn't remember. Not the vast, empty longevity that I had been spending like a currency I had not chosen to earn. My own time. A great and unreasonable quantity of it, and every hour of it to be given. To Jasper, to the family, to the strangers I hadn't met yet, who would need what I could offer, to the futures I could see, and the ones I couldn't, and the ones that surprised me. Given, not spent in mourning, not stolen, not extracted, not held against the question of whether I deserved it. Just given. I stood on the dock in the October light, and Marrow Lake reflected nothing but the sky, and behind me the house waited, and the family waited, and the road ahead was my own. I turned and walked back up from the water,